Chapter 688. Gadotsi excitedly ran towards Wuming. Matthew, who was worried, wanted to follow her but was stopped by Da Vinci. Matthew looked at Da Vinci in confusion, but Da Vinci just smiled and shook his head at Matthew. Although Matthew still wanted to accompany Gadotsi, Gadotsi had already run to Wuming's side. Gadotsi suddenly pounced into Wuming's arms. The moment before Gadotsi pounced in, Wuming turned his helmet into magic power and threw the meteor silver. The golden ripples instantly engulfed it. Due to inertia, Wuming hugged Gadotsi and spun around a few times, successfully making Gadotsi laugh. "Wah, assassin, I missed you so much, ha." Wuming hugged Gadotsi and spun a few more times, then stopped and put Gadotsi on the ground. Wuming then stroked Gadotsi's little head as if he was looking at a little sister who needed love. "I missed you too, Tachika." At this time, Gadotsi's watch suddenly emitted the sound of Roman's crazy and disbelief. "Are you for real? Are you really Sira? This is unbelievable. If I didn't hear wrongly, the knight just called you a Villo. Could it be that you are King Arthur's first knight of the Round Table? Villo Siraed? But that's impossible. You are obviously Sira of Ulster. How could you become King Arthur's knight? The timeline doesn't match at all." Then, Roman seemed to have thought of something, and his voice stopped abruptly. This made Gadotsi a little confused for a moment, thinking, what's wrong with the doctor? Why did he suddenly stop talking after a long speech? Wuming could not help but laugh at Roman's reaction. Ever since he knew about Gidea's identity, he was completely sure of Roman's identity and did not have the slightest doubt. And since Roman was that person, it was not strange that he knew about Wuming. But Roman could not show it. After all, he was just an ordinary human. "Well, I forgot. You are a mysterious guy who has always been alive. If that's the case, then it's understandable that you left a record in history across time." "Ah." Roman laughed. It had to be said that Roman's answer to himself was rather perfect. If he had been alive all this time, he would have been able to recover from his previous shock. It seems that this guy also enjoys being a human. Wuming could see that Roman's surprise for Wuming was indeed real. This meant that the other party did not rely on his previous strength, but relearned as a human. "But how much effort did you put in that ordinary people can't even catch up with you, Roman Ace Man?" Wuming silently glanced at Gadotsi's watch that sent out Roman's communication sound. He seemed to see the young man with a helpless smile on his face. On the other side, Gadotsi just reacted from a sudden realization. Indeed, Wuming once generously admitted that he was still alive, so Wuming was likely to exist in human history a long time ago. Then, it was not strange that Wuming had multiple names and legends. Then, Gadotsi hugged Wuming again with a happy face. "As expected of Assassin, you're still very powerful." Wuming also smiled and hugged Gadotsi, but his eyes were thinking about something. "It seems that I guessed correctly," Wuming thought in his heart. Wuming obviously did not have much contact with Gadotsi, at most only a few times, but just these few times raised Wuming's favorability in Gadotsi's heart to the extreme. On the other hand, Gadotsi's favorability in Wuming's heart also rose to a high level. But whether it was Gadotsi or Wuming, their favorability in their hearts was not the kind of love between a man and a woman, but the kind of affection similar to family. To Gadotsi, Wuming, who appeared several times to help her, was like her brother, and to Wuming, Gadotsi was like a younger sister who encountered trouble and needed help many times. And the reason why there was such a feeling, Wuming guessed that the problem was with Gadotsi. However, even if he had guessed that the problem was with Gadotsi, Wuming did not find any abnormalities with Gadotsi. When Gadotsi threw herself into Wuming's arms, Wuming had already probed Gadotsi's body. But unfortunately, Gadotsi was completely an ordinary magician, and the kind that was at the rookie level. Except for some magic and the command spell in Gadotsi's hand, Wuming did not find any other mystery on Gadotsi's body. However, the most unusual thing was that there was no abnormality. Wuming raised his head and looked at the huge aperture that had always existed in the sky. Could it be that Gidea did something to Tachika? As soon as this thought appeared in Wuming's mind, it was immediately cut off by Wuming himself. There was no other reason. How could a contractor who had formed a fate with many heroic spirits be affected by Gidia? Don't underestimate the star crystallization of human faith, and don't underestimate the miraculous existence called heroic spirits. Senior. At this time, Matthew's voice came from behind Gadatsi, which was in front of Wuming. He saw Mashu holding her big shield and running towards him, while Da Vinci was following behind her at a leisurely pace. By the way, Da Vinci walked over. Matthew. Gadatsi broke away from Wuming's arms and waved at Matthew. After Matthew came to Gadatsi's side, he began to greet Wuming. Senior Sira, long time no see. However, Wuming smiled and shook his head. Call me Senior Villo, Matthew. Huh? Villo? Senior? Matthew was taken aback, and there was a slight change in his eyes, but he quickly recovered. Matthew looked at his hand, somewhat at a loss. Matthew could feel that Galahad, who was sleeping in his body, woke up for a moment, but then fell asleep. Maybe it's because Galahad, who was sleeping in your body, suddenly woke up because she saw the person she respected the most. Da Vinci, who was a step behind, explained slowly. Hey. Is Senior Sira really the knight of the round table? Villo Sira Ed? Matthew was shocked. The answer to Matthew was Wuming's familiar, yet unfamiliar words. It's the real deal, Junior. Ahem. Here, I'll explain to everyone the issue of the address between Galahad and Villo. No matter in any records, Galahad always called the Villo Senior. Da Vinci kindly reminded. So, I have two seniors, Mashu said with excitement and uneasiness. However, Wuming shook his head. Matthew, as a subservient, Matthew does have two seniors, but you have to remember, as Matthew Gillett, you only have one senior, and that is Tachika Fujimaru. After all, only Galahad Sr. was Villo Sira Ed, and Matthew Gillett Sr. was Gadatsi. Matthew and Gadatsi, who heard Wuming's words, were slightly touched. Just listen to Assassin Matthew. Gadatsi said to Matthew with a smile. Facing Gadatsi and Wuming's smiling faces, Matthew nodded heavily. Yes, Senior. Chapter 689. Then, the genius Da Vinci, who didn't know how to break the atmosphere, personally broke the beautiful atmosphere. All right, it's about time to talk about the Villo. First of all, why did the Villo pretend that he didn't recognize us? Da Vinci's words made Roman, who had been listening through Gadatsi's watch communicator, react. Yeah, I would have forgotten if Da Vinci didn't mention it. Why did you change your voice and pretend that you didn't recognize us? Although Roman was good at judging the situation, since Da Vinci had broken the atmosphere, he had nothing to worry about. That's right. I really thought that it was going to turn into a battle again. Phew, Gadatsi said doubtfully and finally let out a sigh of relief. Also, the falling rocks were done by Senior Villo, right? Then why did Senior Villo do that? Matthew also looked at Wuming doubtfully. Cough. Actually, I had my reasons for doing that. Wuming coughed without changing his expression and then became serious. Could it be that you wanted to hide your relationship with Chaldea in front of the night? Roman assisted Wuming by forcefully explaining. Yes, that's right, that's it. Wuming immediately nodded and admitted without hesitation. Thinking about it carefully, Assassin did recognize us after the night left and use her real voice to talk to us. Gadatsi also pondered and said, That's right. After all, if I directly used my own voice, Tachiko would definitely recognize me. Moreover, the falling rocks were to prevent Tristan from suspecting you. That's why I did that. Wuming immediately took advantage of the situation and started to talk nonsense. After all, he couldn't possibly say that he was just being impulsive. Other than Da Vinci, who looked at Wuming with a smile, whether it was Matthew, Gadatsi, or Roman, who wasn't here and only understood the situation through the conversation, they all believed Wuming's words. Wuming hurriedly tried to muddle through, so he quickly diverted everyone's attention. Speaking of which, did you guys come out from the desert? From the position of Gadatsi and the other two, the probability of them coming out from the desert was very high. Gadatsi nodded as Wuming expected. Yeah, we were teleported directly into the desert by spirit particle transference. Gadatsi then told Wuming their experience. First, They entered the desert, causing the desert's enchantment to cut off the connection between Gadatsi and Chaldea. After that, Gadatsi and the others encountered the desert's divine beast, Sphinx. After defeating the Sphinx, Gadatsi and the other two naturally had to explore. After all, they couldn't contact Chaldea at that time, so they couldn't just sit back and wait for death. Fortunately, Da Vinci followed them. After searching through Da Vinci's equipment, the three found a water source and a city. On the way to the city, the three encountered a large group of Sphinx. However, these Sphinx didn't give Gadatsi and the others a headache because a group of men in black repelled the Sphinx group. After that, because the men in black looked a bit like bad guys and they really caught a sleeping woman, Gadatsi and the others came to her rescue. After that, the woman woke up and thought that they kidnapped her, so they fought with the other party again. Fortunately, Mr. Lucius came to help. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to go. Matthew gasped for breath. Lucius. Wooming made a puzzled sound. Yes, that's a knight. He happened to pass by when we were misunderstood by Miss Niticles and saw the truth. So he came out to help us clarify the misunderstanding. Matthew nodded. So where is he now? Wooming wanted to meet this knight, named Lucius. He always felt that he was also a key clue. Mr. Lucius left after he helped us. We don't know where he went, either. Matthew's words disappointed Wooming a little. By the way, Niticles is a pharaoh's follower. After we cleared up the misunderstanding, she brought us to the shrine in the desert. Gadatsi immediately changed the topic. Temple, did you see the Sun King? Hearing Gadatsi say that they went to the temple in the desert, Wooming put his attention to Lucius aside. Yes, Niticles is not the owner of this desert. So after we passed Niticles' test, she took us to the temple to meet the owner of this desert. It should be the Sun King you mentioned. Gadatsi answered Wooming. Wooming was not surprised that Niticles was not the owner of this desert. If she was the owner of this desert, she would not have been taken away in her sleep. Then, can you tell me who the other party is? Wooming looked at Gadatsi and the others seriously. Of course, assassin, you're being too polite. Gadatsi looked at Wooming with some resentment. Sorry. Wooming immediately patted Gadatsi's head and apologized. The head patting was still very effective on Gadatsi. At this time, Da Vinci answered Wooming's question. The other party is Ramses II. It's actually Ramses II, Wooming said with some surprise. There was no other reason, but because Ramses II was a little too powerful. The king, Pharaoh, who ruled the area of Egypt from the 13th to the 14th century BC, was both the son of the sun god and its incarnation. Moreover, Ramses II also built many buildings and even classified the previous buildings as his own. In fact, it made sense when he thought about it this way. Because Ramses II had a large number of buildings under his name, these buildings were sublimated into relics and created a large area of desert similar to an inherent barrier. Unfortunately, we did not find a second city in the desert. This desert was summoned together with Ramses II, not his temple. Da Vinci seemed to have seen through Wooming's thoughts and directly shattered Wooming's fantasy. Wooming was a little overwhelmed. I'm just kidding. In fact, Ramses II moved all the temples together, so you can't see other temples in other parts of the desert. Wooming narrowed his eyes and stared at Da Vinci. At this moment, Wooming felt that this guy was more mischievous than himself. In short, we saw Ramses II and learned that Ramses II has the Holy Grail in his hands. The most surprising thing is, according to Ramses II, he seems to know what happened to us at the previous 5 singularities, Gadatsi said with some surprise. However, Wooming was not surprised. After all, the other party was also considered a god, just like Artoria in the Holy City at this moment. Although Wooming did not ask Artoria, Wooming believed that Artoria must only know about Gadatsi. Then, why did you leave the desert? Is it because of Ramses II's banishment? Wooming hit the nail on the head. Chapter 690. After all, Gadatsi and the other two also needed the Holy Grail. In that case, to Ramses II, Gadatsi and the others were enemies. However, Wuming did not believe that the other party only expelled Gadotsi and the others. There must be other reasons. That was why Wuming asked. Ramses II only let Nidicles punish us. In fact, it was just a fight. Because we won, Ramses II did not make things difficult for us anymore. He even told us a lot of information. From his point of view, Ramses II's character was not bad. The content of the information was as Wuming expected. The Crusaders used the Holy Grail to summon Ramses II, and then were beaten by Ramses II. He even snatched the Holy Grail and summoned his temple in this huge desert, deepening the collapse of morality in this singularity. And the reason why we were expelled is mainly because of Da Vinci. Matthew looked helplessly at Da Vinci, who was smiling without the slightest self-reflection. Da Vinci personally analyzed how Ramses II came to this singularity and his subsequent actions. Then, Ramses II actually used Da Vinci's intelligence as an excuse to take Da Vinci as his concubine. Gadotsi said halfway and could not continue. Wuming also knew the reason. It was because this seemingly gentle big sister Da Vinci was actually a man. Yes, a man. Because of Da Vinci's genius idea, after he was summoned, he created a Mona Lisa face puppet spirit base. After that, he stuffed himself into this spirit base and became a woman, but his heart was still a man. Although Da Vinci did not care about gender, he had always cared about art, which was the beauty of the Mona Lisa. I rejected the pharaoh, and then he kicked us out, Da Vinci said with a smile. Although I didn't see it, I can almost imagine the scene at that time. Even Roman could not help but complain. You must have sternly rejected the other party with a serious look on your face. This was the only way to show Da Vinci's vile taste. Isn't that obvious? Mona Lisa is art. Art doesn't get married. But because of that, the other party shamelessly offered the Lion King in the holy city in the east, Da Vinci said with a smile. This could be considered a blessing in disguise. According to Ramses II, the Lion King is the main culprit behind the accelerated collapse of human nature, Gadotsi said. As expected, Lily's actions also accelerated the collapse of the singularity. Wuming thought to himself after hearing Da Vinci's words. So we decided to meet the Lion King first. Moreover, meeting the Lion King was not only because the other party was also one of the culprits who caused the accelerated collapse of human reason, but also because of Matthew. I'm sorry, Senior. It's all my fault. Matthew apologized to Gadotsi. She had always had a special feeling about the Lion King in the East, so Matthew suggested that they go and take a look. However, this seemingly selfish behavior made Matthew feel deeply uneasy. It's okay, Matthew. After all, I also want to meet the Lion King. Gadotsi didn't think that Matthew was wrong, and Gadotsi also had the intention of going to the Holy City to take a look. Matthew, you want to go to the Holy City to see the Lion King because of Galahad, right? Wuming asked. Yes, Mr. Villo, because according to Mr. Ramses II and Miss Nidicles, I learned that the knights under the Lion King seem to be knights of the Round Table, Matthew explained. The Lion King who can take in the knights of the Round Table. Is his real identity King Arthur? This made Matthew, who knew that the servant attached to him was Galahad, a little concerned. Your guess is right. The Lion King is King Arthur. I just came out of the Holy City and saw him. Wuming's words not only made Matthew sigh, but even Gadotsi, Da Vinci, and even Roman, who had not spoken and only listened, also sighed. The reason why Roman didn't speak was that he didn't know much about the situation before Gadotsi and the others left the desert, so he chose to listen. However, the Lion King used the holy spear. His body was developed, and the holy spear eroded the deified King Arthur. Huh. This made Matthew stunned. In other words, the other party is also a deity. Really, why do we always meet deity-level servants? Roman, who finally spoke, let out a sigh. Do you know about the recent saint selection held in the Holy City? Wuming thought for a moment and looked at the three. Saint selection? It seemed that they didn't know about it. Wuming nodded, then told the three of them what he knew about the saint selection, including the Lion King summoning almost all the knights of the Round Table, making the knights choose to kill each other, and using the holy spear to store pure humans to preserve human specimens, and the Knights of the Round Table slaughtering humans who were not chosen. In short, Wu Ming told Gadotsi and the others all the information he could. This plan is too crazy. Isn't that abandoning almost all humans? Roman was the first to exclaim. The refugees just now were the saint selectors who were almost killed at the Holy City Gate, and the knight who chased the refugees was Tristan. It really is Tristan. Until now, when Wu Ming said it himself, Gadotsi and the others were completely sure that the knight with the bow was Tristan. Just like what Sira said, the other party is already a goddess, no longer a human. Da Vinci also let out a sigh. The reason why no one raised any doubts about King Arthur being a woman was because they already knew that King Arthur was a woman when they were at the Winterwood City Singularity, so they didn't have any doubts. So, to Chica, Matthew, do you still want to go to the Holy City? Roman's solemn voice came from Gadotsi's wrist. Da Vinci and Wu Ming also looked at the two of them. Gadotsi and Matthew looked at each other, then nodded at the same time. Of course we have to go. Since King Arthur has changed, we have to defeat her, Gadotsi said with great emotion. Mr. Galahad entrusted his power to me, so I will also shoulder the responsibility of being King Arthur's subject. I must stop King Arthur. As the successor of the Round Table Galahad's power, Matthew also made a choice. She stood on the opposite side of the king. Wu Ming also believed that if Galahad came in person, he would definitely make the same choice as Matthew. Since that's the case, let me accompany you back there. Chapter 691. But is this really okay? Gadotsi asked in surprise. After all, Senior Villo, you came out because you have something to do. If you go back because of our capriciousness. Matthew sounded a little embarrassed. After all, if Wu Ming delayed something important because of accompanying Gadotsi, then Gadotsi and Matthew would feel bad. Then, Wu Ming stretched out his two clenched hands and placed them in front of Gadotsi and Matthew's heads. Immediately after, the two of them were flicked on the head by Wu Ming's finger that suddenly stretched out. It hurts. Ugh. Gadotsi and Matthew covered their forehead and took 2 steps back. Although even Matthew felt the pain, the strength used by Wu Ming to flick Gadotsi and Matthew's forehead was different. After all, if he flicked Gadotsi's forehead with the same strength as he flicked Matthew's forehead, then Gadotsi's head would definitely be damaged. You two little idiots, what the hell are you thinking? My purpose is to find you. Why did Wu Ming come to this singularity? Wasn't it because he felt Gadotsi's summon? When I came to this singularity, I used the sword you gave to Mashu to summon her, but you didn't respond. Gadotsi protested. Mashu also subconsciously moved the seemingly ordinary knight's sword that had been fixed on her waist. Because she was a shielder, she had basically never used it before. Although this knight's sword looked ordinary, Wu Ming had used a special method to fuse the Holy Grail's blade of salvation with this knight's sword. Thus, as long as he poured mana into it, the blade of salvation would appear. From the information that Gadotsi now knew, Wu Ming was likely to have been summoned by the Lion King at this singularity, so he didn't respond to her summon. When you summoned me, I was busy in another world. I just came to this singularity a few days ago. Wu Ming, who saw Gadotsi's thoughts, immediately explained. Other worlds. Shouldn't other parallel worlds have entered a state of madness at this moment? Roman asked, puzzled. The other worlds I'm talking about are not the world we live in, nor are they parallel worlds of the world we live in. If you want to say it, you can think of it as a different world. After all, whether it was the box court world or several other worlds, for the people of this world, they could be regarded as different worlds. Sai, that's great. I also want to go to the different worlds to have a look. Gadotsi's eyes showed some intention. But before that, we need to repair our world first. Don't bite off more than you can chew, Da Vinci said, and copied Wu Ming and flicked Gadotsi's forehead. Whoa, why did Da Vinci flick my forehead when he kissed you? Damn it. In an instant, Gadotsi showed a tearful expression. By the way, I thought that Senior Villo came out to stop Tristan's pursuit of the refugees. Indeed, I didn't come out for these refugees. After all, I didn't know that they were being hunted. I was going to the desert to find the Sun King to retrieve the Holy Grail, and I accidentally saw it, so I stopped Tristan. Wu Ming responded to Matthew's words. After that, Wu Ming suddenly remembered something. By the way, about the servant in black, you should have seen the identity of the other party. Wu Ming was talking about Smoky Drunk Hassan. If Gadotsi and the other two had been watching, then they must have seen the figure of Smoky Drunk Hassan, and they must have seen the identity of the other party's servant. It's one of Hassan. Gadotsi nodded. Ah, yes, we also met a Hassan before. 100 Faces Hassan. Matthew suddenly remembered. The reason why they knew so clearly was very simple. The other party has the ability to clone himself. Except for the legendary 100 Faces Hassan, who has multiple identities and is proficient in various skills, I really can't think of anyone else. Da Vinci said, "You're talking about the men in black who kidnapped Notorious, right?" Wu Ming looked at Gadotsi and the other two helplessly. Gadotsi nodded, and because the other party had multiple numbers, they killed the group of Sphinx that Gadotsi and the other two encountered. Then, Wu Ming's expression became serious. It's not worth advocating to make a move without figuring out the situation. It's likely to turn allies into enemies. Wu Ming looked at Gadotsi and Matthew seriously. Wu Ming's preaching made Gadotsi and Matthew scratch their heads awkwardly. They also realized the seriousness of the problem. After all, in this chaotic singularity, no one could be said to be a good person. Whether it was the desert, the holy city, or the northern mountains, everyone was trying their best to deal with others for their own sake. Therefore, Gadotsi and the others, as outsiders, suddenly intervened and interrupted one party's plan, which undoubtedly made them enemies. It would be fine if the rescued party became the backer of Gadotsi and the others, but the problem was that Gadotsi and the others only saved the subordinates of Ramses II, and the Helios king also expelled them. This time, they were in a dilemma. However, from the fact that the Helios king only drove Gadotsi and the others away instead of killing them, it could still be seen that the other party was being merciful. After all, whether it was the pharaoh or the king of gods, Pharaoh, who had defeated the Crusaders, it would be a piece of cake for him to get rid of Gadotsi and the other two. Simply chasing them out was already repaying them for saving his subordinates. But in any case, the result now was that Gadotsi and the others still did not find an ally in this singularity. It was a big failure. By the way, since Hassan can defeat the Sphinx group that gave you a headache, how did you repel him? Wu Ming had a lot of doubts. After all, Gadotsi also said that dealing with the Sphinx before made them feel difficult. So how did Gadotsi and the others repel Hassan, who defeated the Sphinx group? Actually, this is the case, Senior Villo. When the other party saw my shield, he thought I was a knight of the holy city, so Hassan retreated directly. And now, Matthew understood that even if she said no, not many people would believe her. At least, that was what the patterns on her armor and the patterns on the shield in her hand told others. She was a member of the sacred city. The people of the holy city were King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. As the inheritor of Galahad's power, she was naturally regarded as a member of the holy city. However, those people didn't know that even the people of the holy city didn't know that they had such a subservient partner. After listening to Wu Ming's information about the Lion King for a long time, Gadotsi and Matthew were unlikely to join the holy city, and Gadotsi and the others had also offended Ramses II and Hassan. Therefore, whether it was the Sun King's desert forces, the Lion King's holy city forces, or Hassan's unknown forces in the northern mountains, under the current circumstances, Gadotsi and the others had no way to win over or join them. Are we going to have to fight alone in this singularity? Gadotsi's face was filled with shock and helplessness. Immediately afterward, Roman, who had been silent, spoke. In fact, because the collapse of this singularity is more serious, Chaldea is unlikely to give you much support. Next, Wu Ming also nodded understandingly. So, unless there are other breakthroughs, you really can only fight alone, Tachika. Gadotsi made an ORZ pose. And just when Gadotsi and Matthew showed a discouraged look, Wu Ming gave them a chance to live. But if I'm here, then there will be no problem. Chapter 692. Well, you're right. Assassin is super powerful. As long as Assassin is here, everything will be fine. Godatsi nodded excitedly. After all, Wuming was someone who could fight against the Magic King without losing. How could he not defeat those gods and goddesses? However, Wuming shook his head. Unfortunately, I'm going to disappoint you. Hey? Godatsi was shocked. She felt like she had been slapped in the face, and it was a very painful kind. Assassin, are you not going to help us this time? Godatsi looked at Wuming pitifully, which made Wuming dumbfounded. Did Varen, Sama, join the Lion King's army? Mashu asked in surprise. Because he had joined the Lion King's army, he could no longer help them. Didn't this make sense? Then, Wuming knocked Matthew on the head. I didn't mean that. Although I met the Lion King before, I didn't join her, Wuming said slowly as he looked at Matthew, who was acting cute while covering his forehead. What I mean is, we can form a force. The scene fell into silence. Then, exclamations resounded through the sky. Huh? Wuming took down his hands that were covering his ears in advance and looked calm. Are you surprised? Wuming looked at Godatsi and Matthew, who had the most intense reaction, puzzled. Of course. Matthew sighed. After all, forming a force is a bit unrealistic for us. Godatsi continued Matthew's words. Then, Roman also spoke through Godatsi's communicator. It's not that I don't agree, but let's not talk about the number of people we have. It will take a long time to build a force. This singularity is already in danger, and we can't guarantee when it will be finished. It was not that Roman was pessimistic, but that was the current situation at the moment. Godatsi and the others have been delayed too much in the first 4 singularities. If they didn't have Wuming's help at the 5th singularity, Godatsi and the others would probably die there, let alone the 6th singularity. If they continued to delay, unimaginable things would happen at this singularity. So, I don't advocate building a force. Roman's words made Godatsi and Matthew fall into deep thought. Godatsi was thinking about Roman and Wuming's words, while Matthew was thinking about whether it would be bad to delay time because of his own stubbornness. After all, now that they had found a most powerful combat force, they could return to the desert temple, seize the Holy Grail, and end this singularity. At this time, Da Vinci, who had been silent all this time, spoke. Although Roman's words make sense, I think Seer's words can also be considered. Godatsi and Matthew looked at Da Vinci. If we have our own force, it will be more convenient to do things, isn't it, Roman? But Roman wanted to refute, but Da Vinci interrupted him. If we don't go to the holy city, it will inevitably become a knot in Matthew's heart. I think you don't want to see Matthew lose something in his heart, Roman. Roman was silent. Godatsi and Wuming might not know, but as an old employee of Chaldea, Da Vinci was very clear. Matthew could be said to be Roman's daughter in another way, because Matthew grew up with Matthew's attending physician, Roman. Sigh. Okay. Roman sighed and compromised. But we are completely understaffed. We can't just rely on the 4 of you to form a force. Roman's tone was full of melancholy. Regarding this problem, I think Sira should have a countermeasure. Da Vinci looked at Wuming with a smile. Wuming nodded as a matter of course. Since I made this suggestion, I naturally have a way. Then, Wuming looked at Da Vinci and emphasized, for this body, call me Villo. Although Wuming was both Sira and a Villo, this spiritual base was summoned as a Villo, so it was better to call him Villo. Yes. Then, Villo, do you have any good ideas? Da Vinci affectionately called out Wuming's name. Deliberately ignoring Da Vinci's bad taste, Wuming smiled. It's very simple. Since we don't have enough people, then we can just call for help. Call for help? Godatsi was confused. Why did it sound like a fight between hooligans? Then where do we call for help? Matthew raised a question. After all, there were currently 3 forces at this singularity, and they couldn't rope in any of them for the time being. Of course it's from another world. Wuming's words made Godatsi and Matthew shout in surprise. Another world? Roman, who was among Da Vinci and Chaldea, had a thoughtful look. It's impossible to explain it clearly. Why don't I show you? Follow me, Wuming said as he walked in a certain direction. Gadotsi and Matthew looked at each other, then looked at Da Vinci, who nodded. You guys go first. My beloved car is still over there. Nodding, Gadotsi and Matthew followed Wuming. After walking for a while, Wuming stopped. We're here. Gadotsi and Matthew heard Wuming's words and looked around. There's nothing? Gadotsi was puzzled. Senior Villo, what do you want us to see? Matthew, who was also puzzled, also asked. The reason why Gadotsi and Matthew asked this question was because the place where Wuming took them was still a wasteland, which was no different from where they were before. Wuming was not in a hurry, as he said patiently. Take a closer look. Gadotsi and Matthew obediently listened to Wuming's words as they took 2 steps forward. This is... Gadotsi's pupils suddenly shrank. The ground in front of them seemed to be neatly dug by a cube-shaped object, and a huge square pit appeared in front of Gadotsi. Senior Villo, this is? Matthew turned to look at Wuming. I arrived here before, and when I arrived, I encountered a group of starving refugees. This is the trace I made to trap them. That's right. The place where Wuming took Gadotsi and Matthew to was the place where Wuming first arrived. Just Gadotsi and Matthew clicked their tongues. Wuming's move was already very powerful in their opinion. Then why did you bring us here? Gadotsi was puzzled. Was it just a show off? But that was impossible. Although they had only known each other for a short time, Gadotsi thought that the Wuming she knew was not a person who liked to show off. The reason why I brought you here is because I'm going to use this place as a base. Base. Chapter 693. Yes, it's a base. After all, if you want to establish your own force, how can you do it without a base? Ramses II had the Great Shrine, Artoria also had the new Holy City, and even the Hassans in the north had intricate mountains as cover. Therefore, establishing a base was a very important thing for a force. Although I don't think we'll be able to use it, Wuming muttered. Huh? Assassin, what did you say? I didn't hear you clearly. Gadotsi heard Wuming's muttering and asked curiously. It's okay. By the way, where did Da Vinci go? Wuming quickly changed the topic. Da Vinci went to find a car she made, Gadotsi replied. Made the car. This made Wuming confused. Could Da Vinci still make the car in this situation? Immediately, Matthew explained. Yes, Senior Villo, we got a lot of materials from the shrine in the desert, including some wood, and Da Vinci used the wood to make 2 working wooden cars. They left the desert in Da Vinci's car. After leaving the desert, Da Vinci noticed that there was a situation ahead, so he temporarily hid the car and walked with Gadotsi and Matthew to check the situation. So when Wuming saw Gadotsi and the other 2, there was no car around them. However, Wuming didn't know what to say about Da Vinci making a car with only wood. He could only say that Da Vinci was worthy of being called a genius. Don't worry about Da Vinci, assassin. How are you going to call helpers from the other world? Is it in the form of heroic spirit summoning? Gadotsi showed a strong desire for knowledge. Almost. Wuming nodded. Wuming was preparing to summon the helpers he needed in the form of a servant. Then, Wuming walked in front of Gadotsi and Matthew. Both of you step back. I'm going to start the summoning ritual. Seeing how serious Wuming was, Gadotsi and Matthew couldn't help but gulp and step back. Wuming took a deep breath and exhaled. Buzz. With a humming sound, several golden ripples spread out around Wuming. Along with the appearance of the golden ripples, silver-white chains emerged from Wuming's golden ripples. These were all pseudo-heaven locks that Wuming had prepared to use as materials for the summoning array. With Wuming's current ability, it was a piece of cake for him to create a pseudo-heaven lock using advanced item creation. Whoosh! The chain swayed and made a clattering sound. One by one, the chains formed a variety of shapes above the pit in front of Wuming. There were arcs, right angles, straight lines, curves. All sorts of arcs, lines, and angles were pieced together by silence, well as if they were building blocks. Gradually, countless pseudo-heaven locks connected one after another, forming a huge magic array. Finally, 2 pseudo-heaven locks extended from the magic array and came in front of Wuming. I hope it works, Wuming said, holding the 2 pseudo-heaven locks with both hands. Buzz. Immediately afterward, Wuming injected the magic power in his body into the two pseudo-heaven locks, and blue magic flames visible to the naked eye appeared on the two pseudo-heaven locks. And these two pseudo-heaven locks were connected to the magic array constructed by a large number of pseudo-heaven locks. So Wuming's magic power actually flowed into the magic array. Wuming continued to inject magic power, and the entire magic array composed of pseudo-heaven locks burned. The burning of the huge magic power caused the surrounding magic power to become restless. The atmosphere also became unstable, and it began to flow violently. In short, it produced some weak hurricanes in the surroundings. "Senior, please be careful," Matthew said solemnly, while coming in front of Gadotsi and blocking in front of her with his shield. Although Matthew also believed that Wuming would not harm them, as the follower of his senior, Gadotsi, Matthew also had to do a good job of protecting her. At the same time, Roman's voice suddenly came from the communicator on Gadotsi's wrist. What are you doing over there, Doctor? What's wrong?" Gadotsi raised her wrist to her chest and asked puzzledly. "Chaldea's instrument shows that there is a fiercely burning magic power source next to you, and its magic power is comparable to the magic power consumed by multiple first-class servants to release their noble phantoms. Zizi, it's still going up. Zizi." Before Roman finished speaking, the communication between Chaldea and Gadotsi was disconnected. Hello, Doctor, are you still there, Doctor?" Gadotsi shouted to her bracelet. "Senior, it may be that Villo's magic array temporarily disrupted the surrounding magic power, causing us to be unable to receive Chaldea's magic signal." Matthew held a shield in front of Gadotsi, looked back at Gadotsi, and explained to Gadotsi. "Hey, is it that serious?" Gadotsi said and looked at Wuming, who was constantly instilling magic power into the magic array composed by the pseudo-heaven lock. What kind of existence was summoned with so much magic power? That thought appeared in Gadotsi's mind. Matthew was shocked by Wuming's current behavior, but the most important thing for her now was to protect her master, Senpai. However, one thing is certain, Senpai, we may have a very powerful helper this time. On Wuming's side, Wuming frowned and continued to instill magic power into the magic array. Wuming's main body's magic power was indeed boundless, and the magic power of Wuming's servant's body was much more than ordinary first-class servants. However, Wuming's servant's body was not his main body after all. There was a lot of magic power, but there would eventually be a limit to it. If the magic power of Wuming's servant's body was exhausted, then Wuming would comply with the rule that the servant has no magic power and cannot maintain the manifestation and withdraw. Now, Wuming's huge magic power had been consumed by 2/3. Wuming decided that if half of the remaining 1/3 of magic power couldn't summon what Wuming wanted, then Wuming would give up. After all, Wuming himself had to leave a guaranteed amount of magic power, then transfer it in one breath. Wuming gritted his teeth, divided the remaining 1/3 of magic power in his body into two parts, and extracted one part of the magic power and instilled it into the pseudo-heaven lock. Boom! The two pseudo-heavenly locks that Wu Ming was holding were broken, because there was too much magic power poured in an instant, and these two pseudo-heaven locks were also fake. The quality was not as good as the real thing, so they were completely shattered and turned into pure magic power. However, it didn't matter even if these two transmission links were broken, because the magic power that had been formed was still connected to the magic array. Even the magic power generated after the pseudo-heaven lock was absorbed and used as a burn for the magic array. And just when this huge amount of magic power was poured into the magic array finally lit up. Chapter 694. The light of the magic circle was like the sun, and Gadotsi couldn't help but close her eyes, cover her eyes with her hands, and curl up behind Matthew. Although Matthew, as a servant, was much better than Gadotsi, she couldn't help but shrink behind her shield, not daring to see what was happening in front of her. However, whether it was Gadotsi or Matthew, Both of them had the same thought in their hearts. That was, Wooming succeeded. Gradually, the light of the magic circle gradually dissipated, and the pseudo-heavenly lock that constituted the magic circle also seemed to have lost its light and shattered all of a sudden. Gadotsi and Matthew, who heard the sound, couldn't help but poke their heads out from behind the shield, looking forward curiously. The two of them didn't return to their senses for a long time. In the sky directly in front of the magic circle composed of the pseudo-heavenly lock, there was a behemoth floating at this moment. The floating island was like a giant tree floating silently in the air. The blood-red roots that were filled with the smell of blood floated in the air like a turf. Instead of leaves, there was a dazzling blue-green crystal. However, this guy was not a tree, but a fantasy species that could move freely and look like a floating tree, Abenheim. However, its huge size, coupled with the height of the floating island, gave people the impression that it was a mountain range rooted in the earth. If it weren't for Gadotsi and Matthew being close to it, they would have thought that the floating island was a mountain. Anyway, the diameter of the floating island was completely immeasurable by the eyes of Gadotsi and Matthew. Both of them even thought that the entire barren land around them was occupied by this floating island. However, the point was not here. What attracted Gadotsi and Matthew was the beautiful figures with wings that flew out of the leaves of the blue crystal. Maybe they were real angels. These angels were all in the shape of young girls, and they all had a peerless appearance. However, the strange thing was that these angels were all wearing sleeveless tops, panties with ribbons and pendants, and asymmetrical pants. Even their shoes and socks were asymmetrical. Although they were wearing clothes that didn't match, the golden ratio bodies of the angel girls were still perfectly displayed. Gadotsi felt that these angels already had bodies and faces that were comparable to Cleopatra and even Maeve, who were known for their beauty. Complex magic circles that looked like the halos of angels were placed above the heads of the angels. Perhaps the pair of white pigeon-like wings was the only thing the angels had in common. The angels flew out of the floating island and came to the position where the magic circle was originally formed by the pseudo-heaven lock. They spread their wings and hovered in the air with their eyes closed. Matthew had no idea how many angels there were in the sky, but in Matthew's opinion, the number of thousands had long exceeded the threshold. Perhaps it was more appropriate to say that there were tens of thousands of them. Among them, a beautiful green-haired girl who was closest to Wooming at the very front, who seemed to be the leader, slowly opened her eyes. Those eyes of hers, which looked like swords and shields crossing each other, made Gadotsi instantly see the contradictory feeling of death and protection. And as if it had caused a chain reaction, the moment the green-haired girl opened her eyes, all the angels behind her opened their eyes one after another. Countless eyes of swords and shields crossing each other were reflected in Gadotsi's eyes. This time, Gadotsi found another common point among the angels. All members of the Skywing race pay respects to the Lord. The green-haired girl opened her mouth and spread her wings as much as she could toward Wooming and lowered her head slightly. Once again, like a chain reaction, all the Skywings behind the green-haired girl said in unison, "Pay respects to the Lord." Countless pairs of wings spread out in the sky, and the countless wings were like a canopy that slightly covered the floating island behind them. The shattered pseudo-celestial shackles turned into motes of magical light that dotted the angels, adding a layer of mystery to the angels. Right after that, the floating island behind the angels seemed to come to life, the blue crystals all over it shaking like a window, reflecting the sun's rays. Wooming, who was not far in front of Gadotsi and Matthew, nodded in satisfaction. This gamble, which he had taken at the risk of exhausting his mana and losing his spirit base, had paid off. Silent Cry had successfully summoned Abenheim in his servant form, as well as all the Skywing species that numbered in the tens of thousands. However, it was reasonable to say that Wooming should not be able to use the dependence of one of the 12 avatars, which meant that Wooming should not be able to summon the Skywings. Although Wooming was currently in his servant form, it did not mean that he was completely a servant. Before becoming a servant, Villothoranced, he was still a root dragon. Wuming had channeled part of the 12 avatars' abilities into the spirit base. But Wuming was afraid that he would attract Gidea's attention if he were too ostentatious. Gaia should also be in a heavily injured state at this moment, and Silent Wonder had confirmed that this singularity was not directly caused by the other party, but indirectly. In other words, the other party did not actually have control over this singularity. However, Wuming could not guarantee that the other party would not come after him directly. Wuming, who had yet to find his main body, did not dare to be so ostentatious. Therefore, Wuming channeled the weakened versions of the 12 avatars into the spirit base, but the price was that their power was greatly reduced, and each ability could only be used once. Wu Ming was able to summon the Skywing race and Abenheim from another world as a servant by using his one use, dependent to transform himself into a holy relic. As for why he summoned them in their servant form, it was because if they died in this world as servants, their main body in the other world would not die. Although the Skywings loved to fight and were not afraid of death, Silent Wonder did not want anything to happen to the children that Artesio had entrusted to him. Secondly, summoning them in their servant form was already the limit for Wuming. If he wanted to summon their main body in the other world, then Wuming would need some time to prepare. But what they lacked at the moment was time, so Wuming directly summoned the Skywings in their servant form. In fact, Wuming also wanted to summon Athena, Lancelot, and the others from the Godslayer world, as well as the god of disobedience who had signed a contract with him, but it seemed that the ability that Wuming injected into the spirit base was a little too weak, and it could only summon people from one world at a time. What Wuming needed now was more people, so Wuming chose the Skywings, which had more people, instead of the god of disobedience, which only had a few people. In short, Gadatsi and the others were no longer short of people, and the nearly 10,000 Skywings were enough. Wuming turned his head and looked at the two people behind him. Gadatsi and Matthew were now in a state of shock. How is it? These people are enough, right? Wuming asked with a smile. Chapter 695. Gadatsi and Matthew were speechless. All they could do was nod their heads. Wuming waved his hand at the Skywing species, indicating that there was no need for them to continue bowing. Whoosh! All the Skywings retracted their wings, which had been spread to the maximum extent, leaving only enough for them to fly. At the same time, they raised their slightly lowered heads. The canopy formed by their wings disappeared and was replaced by beautiful figures. Even so, none of the Skywings acted alone. They all hovered in the air like a well-organized army, waiting for Wuming's order to turn into a sharp blade and pierce the enemy's heart. Sensing the shock and threat that the Skywings brought, Gadatsi and Matthew believed that these young ladies had the ability to do so. And that was indeed the case. Even Wuming had to admit it. Arthas was truly a war god. The race he created completely embodied the characteristics of a warrior race. When they got serious, they were all qualified soldiers. Be it in terms of strength or their ability to listen to commands, the Skywings were definitely an army that all ambitious individuals would fight to have. Even the youngest and most lively, Gopril, was rather obedient. She was still hovering behind Azrael, though she would occasionally throw flirtatious glances at Wuming, which Wuming noticed. No, it should be said that Gopril was doing it for Wuming to see assassin. Are these your subordinates? Are you so elegant in another world? Gadatsi, who had finally reacted, excitedly tugged at Wuming's armored arm. Because Wuming was wearing armor, there was no need for her to tug at his sleeves. However, Azrael, who was closest to Wuming, narrowed her eyes and looked at Gadatsi with hostility. The reason why the Skywings were known as a race of lunatics was that they did not consider the consequences. The Skywings were a bunch of people who would humiliate their masters. Even if they could not beat them, they would still mercilessly attack them. To Azrael, Gadatsi's rude behavior was humiliating her mistress and had crossed her bottom line. In an instant, Azrael appeared beside Gadatsi and slashed her magic scythe at Gadatsi. The entire process took less than a second. Clang! The side slammed into a shield engraved with a lion and a cross, causing Gadotsi to cover her ears. Ugh! Matthew, who was holding the shield, couldn't help but groan. Because of Azrael's strength, Matthew's feet had sunk deep into the ground. Matthew struggled to press his shield against Azrael's attack. "Stand down, Azrael. They're my friends." Wuming looked at Azrael with some displeasure. He really did not expect Azrael to be so impulsive as to charge forward with her scythe. Although even if Matthew did not react to Azrael's attack, with Wuming here, Gadotsi would not be hurt. Azrael's behavior was still a little too much. Moreover, to kill off an ally as soon as she appeared was a little too much. "My apologies, my lord." Azrael immediately canceled her magic scythe and floated to Wuming's side with an apologetic look. Even Azrael felt so guilty that she did not even have any quirky words. "Are you all right, Tachika, Matthew?" Wuming looked at Gadotsi and Matthew with concern. "I'm fine. It's just that the impact just now was a little loud." Gadotsi helplessly pinched her ears. She felt that if the sound was a little louder, she would go deaf. "I'm fine too, Vilos-senpai." As a subservient and a shield-bearer, Matthew's physical fitness was still good. At least, Matthew was able to withstand the blow just now. After that, Matthew showed a look of disappointment. "I just didn't expect that Vilos-senpai's subordinates in the other world were so powerful." Although Matthew was indeed a noob, she had grown a lot after going through 5 singularities. Now she could be regarded as a second-rate top servant. But she still felt that Azrael's attack was a little difficult. Matthew was sure that if Azrael attacked twice more, his shield would be gone. In other words, Azrael had at least the strength of a first-rate servant. However, he still couldn't protect his senpai well. Thinking of this, Matthew sighed in disappointment. It's just that Azrael is one of the strongest skywing species. If it were other ordinary skywing species, it wouldn't be so exaggerated. Wuming comforted Matthew. Yes, Azrael was able to knock Mashu's shield out of her hands in 3 attacks, while the other skywings would only need 5, 6, or even 7 or 8 attacks to knock Mashu's shield out of her hands. Indeed, it wasn't that exaggerated. Then, Wuming looked at Azrael. He was ready to punish her. "What's the matter, Azrael? You shouldn't be an impulsive person, right?" Wuming looked at Azrael, puzzled. Although he said that he was going to punish her, Wuming was not a bad person, so he was just asking. As the first prototype of the skywing species, Azrael was originally the leader of the skywing species when Arthas was not around. Her personality was also not as well as irritable as the other skywing species. So how could she suddenly attack over such a small matter? It was not just Wuming who understood this. Azrael naturally understood this as well, which was why she felt guilty about her actions. As the commander of the skywing species, not being able to control her emotions well was a failure. Azrael understood this very well. However, the skywing species were a warlike, easily irritable, and easily excited race, so Azrael's impulsiveness was nothing. Whether it was Arthas, Wuming, or even Azrael herself, no one had stipulated that Azrael should go against her nature. After all, it would be too much to force someone to go against their nature. However, as the commander of the skywing species, Azrael really should not have been so impulsive. After all, Azrael was a senior who had lived for more than 10,000 years. How could she be so impulsive like a young brat? Moreover, any skywing species could tell that Gadotsi and Wuming had a good relationship, yet Azrael still attacked when Gadotsi was recklessly tugging at Wuming. "Master, I don't know what's going on either. I feel like I'm very impulsive now, but it seems that at the cost of this, my various ability values have increased quite a bit." Meow. Azrael, who had just attacked, was very sure that her strength, speed, and even magic capacity had increased quite a bit. Wuming was taken aback, and he had some guesses in his mind. Then, Wuming looked at Azrael attentively, trying to see something. In the end, he really did see something. So that's how it is. Chapter 696. So that's how it is. Wuming nodded. "Assassin, did you see anything?" Gadotsi asked curiously. Gudazi's behavior made Wu Ming couldn't help but laugh. After all, she had just experienced a life and death situation. Even after walking through the gates of hell, she could still act like nothing had happened. Could it be said that Gadotsi had a good mentality, or that Gadotsi had a big heart? Wu Ming shook his head and explained to Gadotsi, "I saw Azrael's servant attribute." Servant attribute? Gadotsi and Matthew could not help but exclaim, "Yes." Wu Ming nodded and looked at Gadotsi and Matthew. "Matthew, let's not talk about it for now. I think that as a master, you should understand that a master can check the ability value and attributes of their own servants." Wu Ming had made it very clear, and Gadotsi now understood. It must be known that Wu Ming had summoned this angel, named Azrael, in the form of servant, and as a summoned servant, she naturally had a master. So who was Azrael's master? It was undoubtedly Wu Ming in front of Gadotsi. Therefore, Wu Ming could see the other party's ability value. Azrael was summoned as a berserker, so she has the berserk skill to sacrifice her rationality in exchange for an increase in ability value. However, because she was not a regular heroic spirit, Azrael did not lose her rationality, but it was not that she was not completely affected. Azrael just became a little impulsive. That was the reason why Azrael had suddenly become violent. Not only that, but the other Skywing species were all summoned as berserkers, Wu Ming said, looking at the Skywing species floating in the air. Unlike a senior like Azrael, many of the other Skywings have been deeply affected by the berserk effect. If one were to look carefully, they would discover that many Skywings had a hint of irritation in their eyes as they crossed their swords and shields. They had already been floating in the air for a while, and they had already developed quite a bit of arrogance, as if they were already impatient. However, his loyal heart still suppressed the negative effects of berserk. Sure enough, summoning all of them in such a hurry has created a drawback, Wu Ming said with some self-reproach. If Wu Ming was given enough time, he could guarantee that he could summon the Skywing breeds that were not affected by their class at all, unlike now, where the majority of the Skywing breeds he summoned were filled with arrogance. Fortunately, the strength of the Skywings was not suppressed. Instead, it was boosted by the berserk state. Generally speaking, after a heroic spirit descended in the form of servant, its strength would be more or less weakened. After all, it was not its main body. However, the Skywing breeds were not heroic spirits, and Wu Ming had summoned them using his kin as a holy relic. For various reasons, the summoned Skywing breeds were not weakened at all, and all of them were summoned with their strength boosted by the berserk state. Sigh, it feels so awesome. Gadotsi looked at Wu Ming like a fangirl. Even Matthew kept nodding his little head to express his admiration for this senior Villo. At this moment, the sound of a car could be heard by Wu Ming, Gadotsi, and Matthew. The sound of a car? Wu Ming was taken aback. Could it be that Da Vinci had driven over? Ah, it's Da Vinci's car. Matthew, who had already begun to observe, exclaimed. Wu Ming looked in the direction Matthew was looking, and Wu Ming saw a simple convertible car made completely of wood driving over. The person sitting in the driver's seat was the familiar face of Mona Lisa. Wu Ming looked speechlessly at the small car under Da Vinci. It was completely made of wood. Fortunately, this car is powered by magic. Wu Ming sighed. Otherwise, Da Vinci would not be a genius, but a god. If this car was not powered by magic, but by gasoline, Wu Ming would really have to bow down to Da Vinci, who had only used a few pieces of wood to build a modern car. This was as shocking as an ordinary high school student building a nuclear bomb in an ordinary laboratory. Hey, your genius Da Vinci is here. Da Vinci drove the car, while greeting Wu Ming and the others who had already approached. Looking at the wooden car, with a braking system better than any modern car, Wu Ming could only smile awkwardly. If Da Vinci was a businessman in modern times, he would definitely make a lot of money. Gadotsi and Matthew nodded silently when they heard this sentence. When Da Vinci used wood to build this car in a very short time, we also had the same idea. After all, the things born from this guy's hands could completely replace modern products with the same performance. However, even so, Wu Ming always felt that even if Da Vinci became a businessman, others would definitely call him a black-hearted businessman. There was no other reason, it was just intuition. Oh, I was just wondering why there was suddenly a large amount of magic fluctuations here. It turns out that someone summoned a servant here. As a genius, Da Vinci saw the form of the sky-winged species floating in the sky, including Azrael, at a glance. There were tens of thousands of angels here. All of them were servants, and they were not weak ones. Is it something that Villo did personally? It's really surprising. There are so many servants here. Are you the master of all of them? Da Vinci said jokingly, but Gadazzi and Matthew now reacted and screamed. Hey. That's right. These are all servants summoned by Assassin Villo, alone, and Assassin Villo just said that she was their master. Doesn't that mean that these tens of thousands of strong servants are all supplied by Assassin Villo alone? How much magic does that require? Is Assassin Villo the reincarnation of the Holy Grail? You guys think too highly of me. Even I can't provide magic for tens of thousands of first-class servants at the same time. Wu Ming, who understood why Gadazzi and Matthew were screaming, helplessly smiled and shook his head. Because I used a special method to summon them, so I only have a master-slave relationship with them. Whether it's the magic to maintain the present world or the magic to fight, they provided all themselves. The magic I used before is stored in their bodies. What do you think Wu Ming used so much magic for? How could it be used just for summoning? The magic was distributed to the tens of thousands of Skywings and Abenheim. So that's how it is. Gadazzi and Matthew breathed a sigh of relief. But doesn't that mean that Villo's magic is comparable to tens of thousands of servants? Da Vinci tilted his head and asked curiously. Hey. Gadazzi and Matthew screamed. Chapter 697. A few minutes later, Gadazzi and Matthew calmed down. Yes, what else could they do but calm down? Hugging Wu Ming's thigh and shouting, "Big boss, please take me along." In short, whether it was Gadazzi, Matthew, or Da Vinci, after experiencing this incident, they clearly realized the horror of Wu Ming's EX-level magic attribute. No wonder Assassin made a holy grail for him. This was from Gadazzi. Although the holy grail that Wu Ming created back then was only used to provide mana, that was already very shocking. All right, in addition to the shock of Wu Ming's magic attribute, Gadazzi also reconnected with Chaldea. Gadazzi and Matthew told Roman the reason for the disconnection and the reason why nearly 10,000 servants appeared. Then, a scream comparable to Gadazzi and Matthew came from Gadazzi's bracelet communicator. What? Gadazzi disdainfully stretched her arm as far away as possible. If she could, she really wanted to throw away the communicator that was used to contact Roman, because Dr. Roman was really too noisy. In the past few months, Roman's mood has been fluctuating a lot. He always likes to shout. As a doctor, Roman knew that it was not good for his health. But he couldn't help it. Since he met Wu Ming, his heart was often stimulated. How is this possible? Villo is now in the servant state. Let's not talk about the limitations of summoning servants from another world. Just to maintain the existence of nearly 10,000 servants, even Crown Caster can't provide the magic needed in an instant. Roman, who was in Chaldea, looked at the number of servants displayed on the big screen. He was completely crazy. At this moment, there was only one thought in his mind. This was way too freakish. Hey, doctor, how do you know that Solomon can't come up with so much magic? Gadazzi expressed doubts about Roman's words. Although they only met once in the fifth singularity, how did the doctor know that Solomon's magic was not comparable to Wu Ming's? Clang. The sound of someone falling from the chair came from Gadazzi's bracelet communicator. Da Vinci, who had already imagined Roman's embarrassing appearance, covered his mouth and laughed. That's what I told Roman when I went to Chaldea. Wu Ming instantly mediated for Roman. No, that's right. When Wu Ming came to Chaldea, he told me that Solomon's magic is not as good as mine. In the control room of Chaldea, Roman helplessly got up from the ground and sat again. By the way, now that we have the manpower, what are you going to do next? Patting his face, Roman forced himself to be alert. On Gadazzi's side, after hearing Roman's words, everyone looked at Wuming. After meeting Wuming, Gadotsi and Matthew had already regarded Wuming as their backbone. As for Da Vinci, she just thought it was fun and went along with Gadotsi and Matthew. I originally wanted to summon Azrael and the others and build a base here. Wuming glanced at Azrael, who had returned to the sky wings, and then pointed to the huge pit beside him. But I've successfully summoned Abenheim. Since that's the case, there's no need to build a base. Because Wuming had never tried to summon an otherworld's dependent in the form of a full moon, he was not confident. Then, Wuming took a gamble. Not only did he successfully summon the Skywing's servant clones, but he also summoned Abenheim's servant clones. Because they were servant clones, Wuming did not need to worry about the Skywings and Abenheim situation in their own world. This was because what their clones experienced in this singularity only happened in an instant to their main bodies. Assassin, do you mean Abenheim, the giant tree floating in the air? Gadotsi pointed at the giant tree with blue crystal-like leaves and red trunks, which had already risen quite a bit and were floating in the air. It's Abenheim, but it's not a tree. It's a real fantasy breed. Fantasy breed? Roman exclaimed from Gadotsi's wristband communicator. What's that? Gadotsi did not know. It's a general term for creatures recorded in myths and legacies all over the world. Their existence itself is mysterious. Even in the magic world, they are rarely discovered, Da Vinci explained. Senpai, fantasy breed, is simply an extinct creature that no longer exists in our world. The evil dragon Fafnir we encountered in France can be classified as a fantasy breed. In order to make Gadotsi understand better, Mashu, who was in charge of supplementing, gave an example. In other words, fantasy breeds are actually very rare creatures. Gadotsi felt that she understood. Something like that. Abenheim is a little different from the fantasy breeds of this world, but it's not much different. So, there's no need to know too much about it. You just need to know that Abent is also a powerful servant, Wuming concluded. Wuming then continued. Abent was summoned as a rider, but Abent is actually an existence similar to a mount. Azrael and the others usually live on Abent's body. That's interesting. Gadotsi was intrigued by Wuming's words. You can visit it whenever you want, but we need to make a plan now. Wuming's words made Gadotsi nod quickly. Because Abent itself is a flying fortress, and Azrael and the others are also a powerful combat race, the Skywing species. So, there's no problem with manpower and combat power. Skywing species? Matthew looked at the angels still floating in the sky, but he did not underestimate them. Azrael's previous attack was still fresh in Mashu's memory. I really couldn't tell that these cute girls are a combat race. Da Vinci smiled as he evaluated the Skywing species. I'll accept Da Vinci's praise for my Skywing species. Now, I'll talk about my plan. Wuming became serious. Let's not worry about the mountain folk in the northern mountains for now. As a new force, the Lion King and the Sun King on the east and west will definitely be on guard, and I don't think they want to have another enemy for no reason. So, our new force will send an ambassador to negotiate with the Lion King and the Sun King. In this way, so we can see the Lion King legitimately. Chapter 698. Gadotsi had an expression that said, I've already guessed it. Have you become smarter, Tachika? Wuming teased. I'm not stupid. Gadotsi pouted and protested to Wuming. Tachika, I'll leave the task of going to the holy city to you. I'll go directly to the temple of the Sun King. After all, we must get the Holy Grail, and Matthew wants to see the Lion King, so it's most convenient to split up like this. With that said, Matthew lowered his head in shame. I'm sorry, because of his willfulness, things have become troublesome, which is a little embarrassing for our cute little eggplant. However, Wuming pressed Matthew's little head. No need to apologize, Matthew. It's better to say that it's because you have a heart like a newborn that Galahad will give his power to you. In that case, there's nothing wrong with you inheriting Galahad's power to fulfill his regret. Looking at Matthew's clear eyes, Wuming seemed to see Galahad. Although Wuming and Galahad didn't have much contact, Wooming and Galahad had a good relationship. The clarity in his eyes was shared by Matthew and Galahad. I'm glad that Galahad was able to possess you. This is also a kind of luck for him. Compared to possessing a strange person, Wooming thought that Galahad's possession of a good boy like Matthew was the best result. So, don't worry, follow your heart and do what you think is right. Galahad will bless you. Finally, Wooming squatted down and stroked Matthew's little head. Villo Sr. Matthew looked at Wooming's red eyes, and he didn't know what to say. At this time, a gaze was fixed on Wooming and Matthew, who were looking at each other. The two were taken aback, and then looked at the person who made such a gaze. Stare dash. Gadotsi puffed up her cheeks and stared at Wooming and Matthew unhappily. I always feel like you two have entered an inexplicable two-person world, Gadotsi said slowly. How could that be? Senior, you misunderstood. Matthew quickly waved his hands. In Wooming's view, Matthew was not afraid of being involved with Wooming, but he was afraid that Gadotsi would misunderstand. I didn't notice it before, but now I feel that the relationship between Gadotsi and Matthew is too good. Wooming thought in his heart. Gadotsi had an accident when she first came to Chaldea, so she didn't have many friends. Although Matthew had worked in Chaldea for a few years, because of Matthew's special identity, Matthew didn't have many friends. Will something happen? Wooming said with a little worry. And just when Wooming was distracted, Gadotsi had already arrived in front of Wooming. Hey, why are you distracted? Wooming, who came back to his senses, looked at Gadotsi, who was already in front of him, and scratched his head in embarrassment. Sorry, I just thought of something. Are you thinking about the Holy Grail? When Wooming said this, Gadotsi thought of the Holy Grail. After all, Wooming would go to the desert to find the Sun King to get the Holy Grail. After all, Gadotsi wasn't an unreasonable little girl. As a master who had experienced 5 singularities, Gadotsi had become very stable, so she immediately restrained her little temper. Well, I guess so. Wooming agreed. After all, he couldn't just say, I'm thinking about whether there will be an accident between you and Matthew. Indeed, Ramses II isn't an easy person to deal with. If you don't think of a plan, even you won't be able to take him down easily. Seeing that Wooming was in a state of speechlessness, Da Vinci stood up and relieved the pressure on Wooming. I'll be careful. What about you guys? Were you going to leave? Da Vinci looked at Gadotsi. After all, Gadotsi was the master. Well, my idea is to leave immediately. After all, I want to make Matthew feel at ease as soon as possible. As Gadotsi said this, she looked at Matthew. Senior, this moved Matthew quite a bit. Wooming nodded and then said, I think we should wait a little longer. After all, the Skywings have just arrived here and haven't made much of an impact yet. If the Lion King and the Sun King were to be wary of any random force, then they would be too degrading. Therefore, Wooming needed to let the Skywings create a certain reputation in this world, at least a reputation that the Lion King and the Sun King would be wary of before they could negotiate. After all, a weak country had no diplomacy. If they didn't show their strength, the Lion King and the Sun King might launch an attack in an attempt to destroy this new force. But Senior Villo, we don't have that much time. Matthew looked at Wooming in confusion. Wooming must know this, so why did he make such a suggestion? The reason was simple. Because, isn't the chance to become famous here? Wooming pointed to the sky. Gadotsi and Matthew looked at the sky curiously, but there was nothing. Sigh. No, there seemed to be a bright spot. Tachika. Matthew. There's a violent magic reaction in the sky, and the target is predicted to be where you are. Roman's warning voice instantly sounded from Gadotsi's wristband communicator. Although it can't withstand the magic power of the servant Villo just summoned, the magic power that has appeared in the sky has reached an unprecedented level. If it lands, not to mention Abante, you will definitely die. Gadotsi and Matthew screamed. Doctor, is it that serious? Matthew asked uneasily. In Chaldea's control room, Roman was operating the instrument with a worried expression, trying to make his judgment wrong. However, no matter how he estimated, the magic power that had appeared in the sky definitely had the power to destroy mankind. What? What should we do, assassin, Da Vinci's friend, or we should retreat quickly? Gadazzi was panicking. It's useless. The attack from the sky is predicted to land in 10 seconds. Roman's helpless voice came from the communicator. Doctor, shut up. Matthew complained to Roman while looking at the light that was getting bigger and bigger. There was no doubt that if the light that was comparable to a meteorite landed, even Matthew's noble phantasm might not be able to withstand it. To Chica and Matthew, don't be so anxious. Can't you see that Villo's friend is not nervous at all? Gadazzi and Matthew could not help but look at Wooming. Sure enough, Wooming's expression said, "It's finally here." Could it be? Gadazzi and Matthew had some guesses. Yes, it's to show off. Chapter 699. Wooming knew very well what the light in the sky was. It was an attack from Artoria's holy lance, Lungaminiad. The Lion King and the Sun King must have sensed the magic fluctuations from Wooming's summoning of nearly 10,000 servants. Even if the Lion King had fallen into a deep slumber after Wooming's departure, he must have been awakened by the powerful magic fluctuations. How could she allow others to sleep beside her bed? The Sun King alone was enough of a headache for Artoria. How could she allow another mysterious force to disturb her? Thus, Artoria threw the power of the Holy Lance into the sky, allowing it to freely fall and hit the enemies in the distance. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was comparable to an intercontinental missile. This was how the craters in the surrounding wilderness were created. The Holy Lance's attack had different power depending on the amount of magic the user injected. The craters in the wilderness were different in size due to the Holy Lance's power. According to Wooming's judgment, the target of the Holy Lance's attack was undoubtedly the Skywing species. Through his magic, Wooming could tell that the Holy Lance's attack could at least completely wipe out the Skywing species. Of course, that was if the Skywing species did not resist at all. However, how could the Skywing species not resist? Azrael, quickly prepare Sky Strike, Wooming ordered, and the Skywing species began to move. In truth, even without Wooming's order, the Skywing species were already restless. It was not that they were afraid of being killed by the Holy Lance's attack, but rather that they had been floating in the air without moving for a long time. What was the way to relieve the Skywing species' restlessness? Naturally, it was to release the pressure, such as using Sky Strike. All Skywing species prepare Sky Strike. After Wooming gave the order, Azrael began to issue orders to the Skywing species. The impatient Skywing species naturally got into formation very quickly. The Skywing species arranged themselves in a pyramid-like formation in the sky, with Azrael at the top of the pyramid. As weapons of war, the Skywing species had the ability to combine their strength. In other words, the Skywing species had the ability to combine their attacks and release them together. In their world, because Wooming was holding Arthas back, the Skywing species were unable to release the divine strike led by Arthas. They could only release the weaker pseudo-divine strike. However, its power was enough to suppress the forest goblin Zeroth Void Blessing, which was caused by the fantasy breed self-destruction, and the goblin's marrow explosion, which used the spirit marrow as a fuel and had a power comparable to a nuclear bomb. Naturally, Sky Strike was weaker than Divine Strike and Pseudo-Divine Strike, but Wooming did not think that Artoria needed to use Pseudo-Divine Strike this time. All the Skywings could use Divine Strike together. Most importantly, the Pseudo-Divine Strike was a killer move that the Skywing breeds poured all their energy into. Once the Skywing breeds used too much energy, their bodies would deteriorate and their strength would be greatly reduced. Therefore, if they used Pseudo-Divine Strike now, the Skywing breeds would basically have no combat strength left. By the way, because Wooming summoned the Skywing breeds in the form of servants, the energy in the Skywing breeds' bodies was no longer spirits, but magic power. However, this did not affect the Skywing breeds' ability to release their skills. Or rather, they should be called noble artifacts in their current form. A large amount of magic power gathered from the pyramid-shaped Skywing breeds. and a huge energy ball containing terrifying magic power appeared above Azrael. The magic energy ball and the Holy Lance's light were almost on the same line, and Azrael had already aimed the Holy Lance's attack. Unbelievable! The magic power of nearly 10,000 servants has all gathered together as if they had become a single servant. Roman, who was sitting in front of the big screen in Chaldea, exclaimed in disbelief as he looked at the data displayed on the screen. The magic power of nearly 10,000 servants? How terrifying is that? Gadotsi looked at the huge energy ball above the Skywing breeds and gulped. I'm afraid that's already an EX-grade noble artifact. Da Vinci smiled as he watched the activation of the noble artifact. As expected of Senior Villo's subordinates in another world. They're so strong. Matthew nodded solemnly. Only Wuming did not say anything. He just watched quietly, watching the Skywing breed's debut in this world. Sky Strike has been aimed. Azrael's expression became serious. As she spoke, the magic power leaking from the Skywing breeds, including her, instantly dissipated like the calm before the storm. Meanwhile, the eyes of the Skywings that were struck by the swords and shields changed, all of them turning into sharp, scarlet swords. The Skywing breeds had accepted Wuming's contract and obtained the power of protection. They had broken away from the original concept of war weapons and god-slaying weapons and became a normal race. However, this did not mean that the Skywing breeds were no longer god-slaying weapons. Now, the Skywing breeds had switched back to being god-slaying weapons, and because of Wuming's contract, they were even stronger than before after switching back to being god-slaying weapons. Tachika, Matthew, come behind me, Wuming said to Gadotsi and Matthew without looking back as he stared at the sky. Gadotsi and Matthew were stunned, somewhat confused. It's best to listen to Villo. If such a powerful magic attack is released, I'm afraid you'll all be blown away. Roman, who seemed to have seen the future, explained nervously. Gadotsi and Matthew were dumbfounded. Was it that dangerous? They could not even watch from the sidelines. Okay, be obedient. Da Vinci personally dragged Gadotsi and Matthew behind Wuming. Watch carefully. Their Sky Strike is enough to penetrate the sky. Wuming looked at the Sky Strike, which had turned into a sharp cone because the target was an individual and not a group. It was aimed straight at the Holy Lance attack that had already arrived above the Skywing breeds. Sky Strike, there were no fancy words, just heavenly strike. Immediately afterward, Azrael's words made the Skywing breeds shoot out the Sky Strike energy body like a gun that had pulled the trigger. Boom! The Sky Strike energy body's instantaneous eruption stirred up the surrounding atmosphere and mana, forming a shockwave that surged toward the Skywing life forms and below. The ground was directly lifted, and even the air in the central area below the Skywing breeds was temporarily squeezed out for a moment. Wuming spread out one hand, and a pure magic barrier protected him and Gadotsi, Matthew, and Da Vinci behind him. At this moment, an extremely thick thunderbolt shot out from the west side of the desert. Chapter 700. Senior Villo, Mashu shouted, and she put up her shield, trying to use her noble phantasm to block the attack. Although she was not confident that she could block this attack that was comparable to the Holy Lance attack from the sky, she was confident that she could block it. Don't worry, Matthew. Wuming put a hand on Matthew's shoulder, indicating for Matthew to calm down. There was no doubt that it was an attack launched by the Sun King, Ramesses II. He wanted to take advantage of the Lion King's attack to deal with Wuming's forces together. If he succeeded, he would be able to eliminate a troublesome opponent, but if he failed, it would not matter. That was because this new force would have the qualifications to negotiate with the Lion King and the Sun King. And this so-called qualifications was exactly what Wuming wanted. Wuming turned to Abani Haim, who was standing beside the Skywings, and shouted, Abanti! At Wuming's command, Abanti, who had been accumulating power since who knew when, directly unleashed a large amount of pure magic power at the lightning attack from the desert. From the beginning, The crystal-like leaves on Abani's body had gathered a large amount of magic power, but because everyone's attention was on the sky wings, they subconsciously ignored it. Like refracting sunlight, Abani unleashed this magic power at the lightning attack launched by the Sun King from the desert in the west. At the same time, the sky strikes released by the sky wings also hit Artoria's Holy Lance attack, causing 2 explosions. Boom! First was Abani's magic power. It collided with the lightning attack at the border of the desert and the wasteland, causing a huge explosion like a nuclear bomb. Starting from the edge of the desert and the wasteland, which was the epicenter of the explosion, the land within a radius of several kilometers was covered in flames and light. Next was the sky. When the sky strikes of the sky wings collided with the light attack of the Holy Lance, it directly caused a firework-like explosion in the sky. The fireworks produced by the explosion scattered from the sky, and before they could fall to the ground, they were already consumed by the air. Whether it was the explosion of a nuclear bomb in the distance or the explosion of fireworks in the sky, Gadotsi and Mashu were both stunned. So powerful. Gadotsi slowly opened his mouth and said, "So this is the opportunity that Villa was talking about. You've really grasped it well." Da Vinci, who was not affected by the 2 explosions, said with a smile, "Thank you for the compliment, madam." Wuming smiled and nodded. Then, Wuming looked at Gadotsi and Matthew. "Now we have the right to negotiate. Get ready to set off, Tachika, Matthew." The 2 were stunned for a moment before their expressions became firm. Then, Gadotsi and Matthew nodded at Wuming at the same time. Yes, Gadotsi and the other 2 left. No, it should be said that Gadotsi, Matthew, and Da Vinci left with a small beast. Gadotsi and Matthew rode in the wooden cart driven by Da Vinci and headed east to the location of the holy city that Wuming had told them. When Wuming watched the 3 leave, he vaguely saw a small white beast come out of the supplies on the wooden cart and run into Matthew's arms. Wuming didn't know if it was an illusion, but he seemed to see the little beast named Fufu glance at him. "That little guy seems to be avoiding me." Wuming narrowed his eyes and looked at Da Vinci's self-made wooden cart that could no longer be seen. Whether it was in the burning Winterwood City, in America, or now in the Middle East, Fufu would not appear in front of Wuming. In other words, it was trying to avoid appearing in front of Wuming. Wuming was 80% sure that Fufu was definitely not as simple as it looked. However, Wuming was sure of one thing. The creature named Fufu was not malicious to Gadotsi and Matthew. On the contrary, Wuming even felt that Fufu was very close to Gadotsi and Matthew. Sure enough, Tachika is a magical existence. Wuming remembered what Zelik once said to him. "Let's go and find that person who is connected to many stars and can resolve this crisis." That was what Zelrich had said at the time. The crisis should be this time's burning of humanity, and the person who has connections with many stars, I'm afraid, it should be Tachika, Wuming indifferently said. "If it's me, I should be considered one of these stars," Wuming said as he looked into the distance. Master, what should we do next?" Suddenly, an extremely pleasant and excited voice entered Wuming's ears. "Goprel." Wuming curiously turned his head. This was undoubtedly Goprel's voice. "Little Goprel, that was rude, meow." Azrael chased after her. Ma, what's the matter? It's rare for me to come to another world, so I have to have fun," Goprel excitedly somersaulted and impatiently said. Wuming helplessly smiled. Among the sky wings, probably only Goprel would be so bold to chat with Wuming. However, Wuming rather liked this sort of boldness. Looking at the other sky wings still floating in the air, waiting for orders, Wuming said, "Let the other sky wings rest first," Wuming said. Even after becoming servants, the sky wings still retained the disadvantage of their race, which was that once they overused their elves, they would degenerate into a powerless infant state. And this disadvantage for the servants was that once their mana was exhausted, they would disappear and leave the stage. This was because Wuming had used a special method to summon the sky wings. Wuming did not need to provide mana for them to appear in the real world. The mana used to summon them was stored in the bodies of the sky wings, becoming the mana they needed to maintain the real world. Although this method was very convenient, the Skywings were unable to control the holy city's mana. Thus, once the mana in their bodies was exhausted, they would immediately leave. The Sky Strike just now was unleashed by all the Skywings at the same time, and they did not use their full strength. There was no need for her to go all out for a mere show of strength, not to mention that doing so would cause her to leave the stage. Thus, Azrael did not have the Skywings invest much mana, only enough to offset the Holy Lance's attack. However, even if that was the case, the amount of magic power contributed by the Lion King was not a small amount. The attack launched by the Lion King with the Holy Spear was not a casual attack, but a powerful attack. After all, Artoria would not underestimate any potential enemy. As a result, the amount of mana that the Skywings expended when they released Sky Strike was already 1/10 of their total mana. Wuming felt that it was best to let them rest for a while. Yes, meow. Azrael released a burst of energy in the direction of the Skywings. When the Skywings floating in the air saw this, they immediately returned to Abath. This was a command signal exclusive to the Skywings. So, Master, what do we need to do next, meow? Chapter 701. Azrael's question made Wuming fall in a deep thought. To tell the truth, Wuming had no idea what to do with the Skywings' next course of action. It was none other than the fact that the Skywings had all been summoned at the Berserker rank. Azrael and Gabriel were still able to maintain their rationality because their strength was among the best among the Skywings. The other Skywings did not have the same strength as Azrael and Gabriel, which meant that the ordinary Skywings were unable to maintain their rationality while in the Berserk state. The proof was that the Skywings had only been in the air for a short while before becoming restless. This completely proved that the ordinary Skywings were unable to completely resist the effects of the Berserk state. As such, the Skywings, who had lost their rationality, truly became weapons of war and could only follow the orders of others. Wuming sighed. To be honest, he would rather the Skywing species not be Berserker. He would rather not have the attribute bonus from Berserk. What he wanted were rational helpers, not weapons that completely obeyed his orders. It was also Wuming's fault for not making the necessary preparations, which resulted in the Skywings being summoned as Berserkers. However, the Berserker class was quite compatible with the Skywing species. Without deliberately choosing a class, the Skywing species were collectively chosen as Berserkers. It could only be said that the Skywing species were indeed worthy of being called weapons by the other races. In short, although Wuming was somewhat dissatisfied, the Skywings were rather satisfied with their current ranks. The most typical example was Gabriel, who was standing in front of Wuming. Hey, Master, aren't you going to find that Sun King? Why don't we just kill our way over there? How about it? Gabriel excitedly egged on Wuming. Little Gabriel, Master has his own plans, meow. Azrael retorted. Azrael was not wrong, but Wuming's plan was ruined when he learned that the Skywings were all Berserkers. Well, what does it matter? Plans can be changed. Gabriel looked at Wuming with a bright smile. Let the other Skywings be on standby in Abanthe, Wuming suddenly said. That means... Azrael seemed to have understood something. We have a mission, right? Gabriel excitedly flapped her wings, white feathers flying everywhere. Wuming nodded, which made the two Skywings very happy. To the Skywings, fighting was their way of survival. In the beginning, Arceus created the Godslayer weapons, known as the Skywings' only one goal, to kill himself. Unable to find an opponent, he could only rely on himself to kill himself. But even Artesius would choose the path of suicide. Thus, he created the Skywings were. It was very funny, right? Arceus did not create the Godslayer weapons to kill other gods, but to kill himself. This might be laughable in the eyes of others, or even other gods, but in Wuming's eyes, it was a matter of course. Up until now, Silent Wonder had met many people and visited many worlds and places. He could understand Arthur's unparalleled loneliness. It was precisely because of this that Arceus had used all his strength in his battle with Wuming, not holding back. The result was naturally Arceus's defeat. Even if he had to pay the price of death, Arceus would accept it because he had fulfilled his wish. However, the Skywings did not. Although Arceus's goal in creating the Skywings was to kill himself, to his surprise, the Skywings did not have the power to kill him. As for the Skywings that were born from the broken wings of the god of war, Arceus, they only had two goals after they were born: loyalty and battle. The ultimate goal of the Skywing species was to obtain victory for their master, Arceus, through constant battles and personally offer him the Star Cup. As for where they would go after the battle, they had never thought about it. As long as Arceus was around, there would be no problem. However, Arceus had been killed by Wooming. Cough, cough. It cannot be said that he had been killed by Wooming. That was the path Arceus had chosen. He had chosen to fight Wooming with his life, even though he had never won against Wooming. Arceus was satisfied. He had finally been defeated, although the price was death. Although the Skywings could not fulfill Arceus's wish, at the very least, the Skywings were Arceus's kin. Arceus and the Skywings still had a relationship of subjects. Thus, Arceus, who understood the Skywings, prepared a way out for them. Knowing that he was about to die, Arceus entrusted the Skywings to Wooming. Arceus knew very well that if the Skywings lost him, they would have no one loyal to them. If Wooming obtained victory, the Star Cup would definitely fall into his hands. If the order of the world was reset, the Skywings would very likely lose their right to fight. This was because the new world would no longer be allowed to be destroyed by force. As such, the Skywings would lose their reason to live. Unlike Arceus, the Skywings would definitely choose to commit suicide after losing their reason to live. It was like a swarm of bees losing their queen or a swarm of ants losing their queen. Those who had been willing to be subordinates for a long time and were used to following their superiors' orders would be at a loss and have nothing to do once they lost their superiors. This was the case for humans and animals. A simple Godslayer weapon would naturally be scrapped after losing its user. Thus, Arceus entrusted the Skywings to Wooming, an enemy that Arceus liked. After that, Arceus left in satisfaction, and the Skywings gained a new lease of life because of Arceus' final order. Whether it was that Wooming had replaced Arceus as the pillar of support for the Skywings, or that Wooming had only respected Arceus and pitted the Skywings, in any case, the Skywings and Wooming were now inseparable. After the Skywings collectively swore their loyalty to Wooming and signed a dependent contract, Wooming treated them as his own. To put it bluntly, if Arceus suddenly came back to life and wanted to take the Skywings, Wooming would probably not agree. Of course, even if Arceus came back to life, he would not do such a thing. Although Wooming and Arceus had only interacted in that battle, Arceus was too easy to understand. Thus, Wooming believed that Arceus would not do such a thing. Shaking his head, Wooming stopped thinking about this matter and instead looked at Azrael and Jillian, who were quietly waiting for him. Azrael, go and support Tachika and the others. Wooming began to give orders. Chapter 702. Although Da Vinci is with Tachika and Matthew, I'm still a little uneasy. Compared to the other Skywings, you're more steady. If something happens, just act according to the situation. Wooming looked into Azrael's eyes with trust. Wooming believed that Azrael could handle this matter well. After all, the title of the first individual to command the Skywings was not just for show. Yes, Meow. Azrael's eyes turned cold as she replied confidently. Okay, go on. Wooming nodded. Azrael spread her wings and was about to fly in the direction of Gadatsi and the others when Wooming suddenly called out to her. Right, there's something you need to pay attention to. Try not to be discovered by them. Wooming extended a finger, indicating the importance of this matter. Azrael was taken aback, but she quickly reacted and nodded. From a moment she descended into this world as a servant, Azrael could tell that the orange-haired woman had an unusual relationship with her master. And after she rashly launched an attack on the orange-haired woman, Azrael realized just how important the orange-haired woman was to her master. Her master wanted her to support the other party and try not to be discovered. This was undoubtedly to temper the other party. No matter what race it was, they would all perish in peace. The Skywings understood this, but they did not take it to heart. This was because they would not let themselves live in peace. Instead, they would do their best to put themselves in a dangerous state. This was because they were weapons, and they needed to fight. Although the information was not complete, Azrael understood that while the orange-haired woman was very weak, the other party was not ordinary. It could be said that she had a rather strong heart. She did not panic even after nearly being cut to death by her scythe. From this, one could see the mental fortitude of the other party. However, the other party was truly too weak. The orange-haired woman was so weak that there was no limit to it. That little girl with the shield was worth a second glance, but it was just a glance. If Wuming could hear Azrael's inner thoughts, he would feel helpless. Whether it was Gudatsi, who was the master, or Matthew, who was the servant, they had done their part and reached the height they should have reached. It was already a miracle that Gudatsi, who had no knowledge of magic and was only forced to come here to make up the numbers, had made it this far. If other magicians were to be the master, they would have fallen at some point. There was also Matthew. As a human who accepted the power of a servant and became a subservient, Matthew's strength at the moment was already a second-rate servant. To be able to reach this level as a subservient, no one else would be able to do it. The reason why they were able to persevere was not because of their powerful strength, but because they were more determined than anyone else. Because of the beauty and strength of the heart, Gudatsi met servants who were willing to help her and helped her break through the difficulties. Because of the tenacity and perseverance of the heart, Matthew's shield was able to block all attacks on Gudatsi, because Galahad's shield was completely in line with Matthew's characteristics. As long as the heart was firm, the shield would not be broken. This was the special nature of Galahad's shield, which made the shield in existence comparable to Artoria's absolute defense. Avalon and Wuming were invincible armors. This was the power of the heart. However, in Azrael's view, it was not enough to have a strong heart. Gudatsi and the others were still very weak. Therefore, it was normal for Azrael to say that they were too weak. After all, Azrael was a god-slayer. In the eyes of the god-slayer's Skywings, whether it was Gudatsi or Matthew, they were too weak. Just as Matthew had thought before, if Azrael had slashed Matthew's shield a few more times, Matthew's shield would probably have fallen out of his hands. And if Wuming had not intervened, Azrael could have teleported behind Gudatsi and beheaded her, and she would have done it so quickly that Matthew would not have been able to react. In the eyes of the strong were respected Skywings, weakness was the original sin. The forest elves were too weak, so Azrael's sky strike destroyed their capital. Humans were too weak, so the aftermath of the battle between a dozen races and the various gods of creation led them to the brink of extinction. The other races were too weak, so they were suppressed by the Forest Elves Alliance, the Goblins Alliance, and the Skywings. Meanwhile, Art Hugh was too weak, so he had indirectly died at the hands of Wuming, and the Skywings had been entrusted to Wuming. In the eyes of others, Wuming could have rejected Arthur's request and exterminated the Skywings with the intention of eliminating them by the roots. However, Wuming did not do so. Instead, he complied with Arthur's wishes and chose to take the Skywings under his command. To put it bluntly, the reason the Skywings had submitted to Wuming was not only because of Arthur's dying wish, but also because they were too weak. Again, weakness was the original sin. And it was precisely because they were weak that Gudatsi and Matthew needed to be tempered. It was also because of this that Wuming had instructed Azrael not to expose herself as much as possible. No matter who it was, the strength of their companions would often encourage them to slack off. Only when they were cornered would they go all out, and only when they went all out would their potential be stimulated. It was precisely because Gudatsi would always be in a cornered situation that she would always put her life on the line, and this spirit infected many of her followers, making them willingly follow Gudatsi. However, there was another saying that was very good. How can a person's shoes not get wet when walking by the river? Gudatsi would always be in a cornered situation, so if she went all out, it would be very easy for her to fail. In order to avoid such a situation, there was only one way. That was to make Gudatsi more and more accustomed to the situation of being cornered, and gradually reduced the level of cornered to the level of sudden events so that he would not have to risk his life to pass every time. As such, Azrael understood Wu Ming's intentions very well. "Yes, master, I understand, meow." Azrael looked into Wu Ming's eyes and nodded. Then magic surged, and she flapped her wings and flew into the distance. Watching Azrael leave, Wu Ming looked at Giliel. "Is it my turn, master? Do I have mission?" Giliel excitedly pulled Wu Ming's arm. "If it's Giliel, why don't you take a guess?" Wu Ming smiled mischievously. "Could it be the Sun King who attacked the desert?" Giliel instantly said, based on the available information, their current enemies were only the East and West, and the East enemy had been handed over to Azrael. So, if she was the one, it should be the West enemy, the guy who added the Sun King. "You guessed right." Wu Ming nodded. However, before Giliel could cheer, Wu Ming's next sentence made her expression freeze. "But it's with me." Chapter 703. In the sky at the center of the wasteland, Abendheim quietly floated high up in the sky, basking in the sunlight. The crystalline leaves on Abendheim's body glowed a dark blue under the sunlight, swaying as if it was breathing, giving off the impression that it was asleep. However, while Abendheim was not sleeping, the skywings in its body were asleep. This was because the skywings had lived on Abendheim's body since ancient times, and Abendheim's body had evolved into a fortress, so every skywing had its own room. However, Abendheim did not have any doors or windows. All it had were the branches of a giant tree and the crystalline bodies that resembled leaves. The skywings had special properties that allowed them to freely travel through space, so they did not need doors or windows. This was why Abendheim did not have any doors or windows on its body. Inside Abendheim's body, there were only rooms. Although there were corridors, they were relatively rare. After all, the skywings could basically just pass through walls. In the bedroom-like rooms of the skywings were floating in the air, wrapped in their own wings as they slept. Wu Ming was afraid that the skywings would go berserk and run amok after he, Azrael, and Gapril left, so he had ordered them to enter this sleep-like standby state. There was a reason why the skywing species was called a weapon. This standby state was a low-energy state that the skywing species could achieve. Every time they were seriously injured, they would maintain this state when they used a special regenerative device to repair their bodies. Although there were some who did not like to enter this standby state, such as Gapril, there was no doubt that this standby state had a faster effect on their recovery, which was why they maintained this state. Sometimes, when the skywings lost their energy and became children, they could use the regenerative device to speed up their recovery. This was because if they did not use the regenerative device, they would have to wait several hundred years to recover. When the skywings used the regenerative device, they would have their companions around them to protect them. After all, the regenerative device required the skywings to activate it. However, there were no records of the skywings collectively repairing themselves, nor were there any records of the skywings collectively entering a standby state. If the enemy took this opportunity to attack, they would be done for. However, there was still Abendheim. After Wu Ming had the skywings collectively enter a hibernation state, he had Abendheim enter the highest state of alert. As long as there was any movement in Abendheim's surroundings or inside, Abendheim would instantly awaken all the skywings and enter attack mode. Abendheim was not to be underestimated. As a phantasma, which was ranked second among the 16 Exceed races, Abendheim didn't just have an advantage in terms of the amount of sprites in his body. He was an existence that could mutate and evolve into a demon king that was close to the level of a god. How could he be weak? When the deities did not appear, phantasma were the strongest. Therefore, when Arthas did not appear, the skywing breeds in Arthas camp were not the strongest. The strongest skywing breeds under Arthas should be Abendheim, who was a phantasma. He was an existence only under Old Deus, which could be said to be the closest to a god. Previously, the Lion King and the Sun King had launched attacks of almost the same degree at the same time, and the Skywings had to work together to block the Lion King's attack. However, when faced with the Sun King's thunderous attack, Abenheim alone, no, a phantasma, had blocked it. This was the best proof of Abenheim's strength. Furthermore, Abenheim had the attribute bonus of being a rider. Although it was a little strange for him to ride himself, at the very least, Abenheim's strength had been increased, and he had not sacrificed his rationality like the Skywings. Whether it was a frontal attack or a sneak attack, Wuming believed that Abenheim would be able to discover and stop the enemy, protecting the Skywings. Wuming reckoned that in this era, at this singularity, only the mysterious First Hassan could infiltrate Abenheim. Although this was an era where multiple Hassans existed, based on the information Wuming had gathered, the First Hassan should not appear. First, the First Hassan had never appeared in historical records, and no one had ever claimed to have seen him. Be it the records of the summoner or the historical records of this person, they were all very mysterious. It was said that the First Hassan would behead the previous Hassan when they went astray, following the sound of the evening bell, and then enter the mystery again. This meant that it was very likely that the other party would not appear, and even if he did appear, he would be looking for Hassan and not Abenheim or the Skywings. Apart from the First Hassan, Wuming did not think that there was anyone in this era and singularity who could affect Abenheim and the Skywings. Thus, with Abenheim around, Wuming was very assured. After instructing Abenheim to protect the Skywings, Wuming set off with Gopperl. Because both of them could fly, Wuming and Gopperl flew toward the desert. Wuming lowered his head and looked at the border between the desert and the wasteland. There was a huge crater that was not inferior to the crater created by the Holy Spear. This was the mark left behind by the collision between the Sun King and Abenheim, and it happened to be on the border between the desert and the wasteland. However, this was not the main point. Wuming was thinking about how Ramses II had unleashed that attack. Wuming had seen very clearly that it was an attack in the form of a lightning pillar, and Wuming had no doubt that it had been unleashed by some huge object. Could it have been unleashed by the other side's temple? Wuming wondered. Based on Gadatsi's information, Wuming had obtained some information about Ramses II. The other side was a rider, and he had summoned the entire desert, an army of sphinxes, and even gathered all the temples in one place. From the looks of it, the other side's mounts had to be those temples. As for why it was not the sphinxes, it was because, according to Gadatsi's information, those sphinxes came in a large group. Rare things were expensive, and too many of them were cheap. If the mount were those sphinxes, then Ramses II's value would be too low. Wuming joked before shaking his head. In short, no matter what the other side's mounts were, if they could not come to an agreement, he would just have Gopperl unleash a sky strike. With that in mind, Wuming looked at the beaming Gopperl flying beside him. Seeing Wuming look at her, Gopperl's smile became even more radiant. "What's the matter, master?" Chapter 704. Are you okay, Gopperl? Wuming smiled awkwardly. Wuming felt that his joke just now had made Gopperl unhappy. Gopperl originally thought that she could go alone, but in the end, she had to go with Wuming. How unpleasant was that? It was like a parent agreeing to let you go out and play with your friends, but in the end, when you were playing with your friends, the parent was sitting next to you. How restrained was that? Wuming felt that Gopperl was now a child who was throwing a tantrum, and he was the parent who made her throw a tantrum. "I'm completely fine, master." Gopperl's smile became even brighter. "If you're fine, then you're fine." Wuming nodded calmly and stopped asking. Wuming felt that if he continued to ask, something terrible might happen. Not only did women have a sixth sense, but so did Wuming. And Wuming believed in his intuition most of the time because his intuition was right every time. Right, master. Let's go steal something this time. Do you want me to use Sky Strike directly?" Gopperl suggested kindly. Overruled. Wuming rejected Gopperl's suggestion without even thinking about it. Why? Is master not going to let me do it? Gopperl guessed with a very puzzled expression. How could that be? Wuming shook his head, expressing that he would not think that way. "I hope you don't have to do it, but that's too unrealistic," Wuming thought in his heart. In fact, rather than Wuming bringing Gopral to find Ramses II, it was more accurate to say that Wuming is worried that an accident will happen if he leaves Gopral alone. If Gopral were to be on standby or follow Azrael to the holy city, Wuming felt that Gopral would definitely do something. After all, she was now a berserker. Even Azrael, who was the original individual, was affected by berserk. Wuming did not think that Gopral was not affected by berserk. Although Gopral did not seem to have changed at all, this was just the calm before the storm. Wuming believed that if Gopral no longer suppressed herself and completely released herself, she would definitely become a true berserker. Although it was not to the extent of harming her allies, the Skywings and Wuming, Gadatsi and the others would not be spared. Moreover, if Gopral were to get angry, she would probably kill her allies just the same. That was why Wuming had chosen to have Gopral follow him and not act alone or with others. According to the information from Dachika and the others, Ramses II probably won't be able to summon the Holy Grail so easily. When the time comes, I don't mind you using Sky Strike. Wuming's words made Gopral's eyes light up. Really, Master? But take it easy when using Sky Strike. Don't use up all your mana, Wuming emphasized. Yes, I'll control it, Master. Gopral gave Wuming an obedient smile. However, the more obedient Gopral was, the more uneasy Wuming felt. Gopral was the kind of person who could use up all her elves with a single Sky Strike. She would definitely not save them for a second Sky Strike. However, Gopral could not be said to be stupid, only reckless. No Skywing would directly use Sky Strike on the Forest Elf capital just because they got a bump on their head from the defensive magic of the Forest Elves. That was the capital of the Forest Elves. Even she would have to check the situation before launching an attack. What if the enemy had some secret weapon? However, because of the bump on her head, Gopral had directly used Sky Strike at its maximum capacity. The important thing was that Gopral had succeeded. She had successfully destroyed the capital of the Forest Elves. A large number of precious books that recorded many spells had been plundered, and the Forest Elves had directly changed their capital. There was no doubt that there was a problem with this. If the Forest Elves were so weak that they were almost wiped out by a Skywing, then what qualifications did they have to be the best in this war? As for the reason, Wuming had learned from Azrael. At the time, the Forest Elves had just fought with the goblins, and the Forest Elves had been stolen by the goblins. The Forest Elves, who had activated all sorts of spells, including the Forbidden Flight spell, were prepared to use this opportunity to correct themselves. In the end, it was the Forbidden Flight spell that had caused Gopral, who had been drawn over by the battle, to be hit. Afterward, Gopral touched the bump on her head with tears in her eyes and used Sky Strike on the Forest Elf capital, which nearly exhausted all the elves in her body. The Forest Elves' most serious problem was that after they had repelled the goblins, they had been ambushed by the Skywings. Gopral left with a large number of books in satisfaction, while the Forest Elves retreated, choosing to directly retreat and rebuild their capital in another place. After all, that place had already been discovered by the goblins and was no longer safe. Sooner or later, they would have to find another place to build their new capital. Moreover, that place had been baptized by the Skywing's Sky Strike. Compared to building a new capital after rebuilding it, the Forest Elves chose to build their new capital in another place. Azrael already told me that after you brought the books you obtained from raiding the Forest Elves capital back to Abandi, your body became smaller due to overexertion of your elves. Wuming bluntly exposed Gopral's past. That's because I was too angry, actually causing a bump on my noble head. How could I not teach those long-eared fellows a lesson? Gopral stroked her head as if it was a treasure. Gopral understood what Wuming was talking about. After all, even she had only succeeded in raiding a capital once. Furthermore, I had good control over my elves. Even I wouldn't expose my weak people to the enemy, Gopral said solemnly. That was because if they had encountered a slightly stronger enemy at that time, the only outcome would have been death. While it was true that the Skywings were weapons, they would not fearlessly throw their lives away. Thus, the Skywings would basically not let themselves exhaust their energy and turn into children, or rather, They would do their best to avoid that, except for Goprel. Whether it was healing injuries or recovering energy, only Goprel would frequently use it. Even the Skywings would not directly use Sky Strike. After all, it consumed too much energy. Only Goprel would frequently use Sky Strike without restraint. It could only be said that she truly lived up to her name. Not only was her strength outstanding, even her personality was unrivaled. It was not as if this bold heart of hers did not bring benefits. Goprel had a superhuman record of challenging the dragon elves 5 times and finally successfully subduing them all by herself. Although Goprel had almost died. Besides, isn't Master still here? I believe that Master won't ignore me, his kin. Goprel had an expression of hugging the thigh of Big Shot. This made Wooming helplessly smile. Arthas is no longer here, so I'm now your guardian. Whether it's you or the other Skywings, you'd better be careful. I don't want to see your numbers dwindle so soon after Arthas entrusted you to me. After Wooming said that, he gave Goprel a knock on the head. Ouch! Goprel's eyes were filled with tears. Wooming helplessly shook his head. Goprel was clearly faking it. He had not used much strength, but this could be considered giving Wooming face. Afterward, Wooming increased his speed, and without turning his head, he said to Goprel, who was hugging her head with tears in her eyes, "Hurry up and follow me. If you're too slow, I won't give you the chance to use Sky Strike." Sure enough, Jillian instantly smiled and spread her wings, catching up to him. "Yes, yes, Master." Chapter 705. Due to the increased flying speed, Wooming and Goprel soon entered the desert area. Perhaps the Sun King knew that Wooming was coming, but a sandstorm suddenly appeared in the desert where the weather was not bad. Moreover, this was not an ordinary sandstorm. The magic power contained in it was enough to easily crush an ordinary human body. With that, Wooming was even more certain that it was caused by the Sun King. As for the reason, Wooming did not think that it was because of expulsion, but because the power of the sandstorm was too weak. Perhaps it was because Wooming and Goprel flew in, and the Sun King's goal was to force Wooming and Goprel to land. However, Wooming did not want to buy it, because he had no intention of obtaining the Holy Grail peacefully, and there was no need for it. In the sandstorm, Wooming and Goprel were still flying. Apart from being a little blurry, the sandstorm did not hinder Wooming and Goprel in any way. Goprel only needed to keep magic power around her body to isolate the sandstorm from her body. Wooming was even more simple and crude. He only laid out a layer of psychic power around himself. Wooming also tried to break the sandstorm, but every time he did, a new sandstorm would appear in a few seconds. In addition, after entering the desert, Wooming had a feeling that he had entered someone else's territory. Therefore, Wooming guessed that the entire desert was likely under the Sun King's control. But judging from the fact that the Sun King only summoned the sandstorm in the desert area, the Sun King's control might not be strong. The reason was unknown. All right, Wooming also vaguely saw something similar to a sphinx in the sandstorm. That should be the sphinx mentioned in the information provided by Gadotsi. But every time Goprel unwillingly broke the sandstorm, the sphinx would disappear without a trace. Only when the sandstorm was summoned again would the sphinx reveal a trace of their figure. After Wooming broke the sandstorm for the first time and saw that the sandstorm was summoned again in a few seconds, he no longer bothered to deal with the sandstorm. However, Goprel refused to give up and kept trying. Although she was also interested in the sphinx, Wooming felt that it was more due to Goprel's character and the influence of the Berserker. Although Goprel failed every time. Goprel was so angry that she almost released Sky Strike. If Wooming had not stopped her, she would have been in a stalemate with the sandstorm until her mana ran out. Just like that, accompanied by the sandstorm, Wooming and Goprel flew toward the location of the central shrine provided by Gadotsi. This hateful sand is really annoying. Goprel gritted her teeth and followed behind Wooming. The sand rolled up by the sandstorm was like raindrops that constantly slapped against the mana released by Goprel. This made Goprel, who was helpless against the sandstorm, very frustrated. You have to learn to calm down. I won't let you change your habit of loving slaughter. Not to mention, you who love slaughter need to be calm, because once you lose your cool, it means that you have lost half the battle. So, you need to calm yourself down quickly, Wu Ming said to Gopral without turning his head. Although Wu Ming was not against slaughter, he did not like it, either. Moreover, Wu Ming, who was used to living a peaceful life, was gradually moving closer to not liking slaughter. Besides, if you use your mana recklessly because you're frustrated, when your mana runs out, you'll have to leave. You don't want to leave immediately after arriving in another world, right? You won't be able to enjoy anything like that. Wu Ming scared Gopral. Oomph. Isn't there still a master? After I arrived in this world, I received some strange information. A master can replenish a servant's mana. With a master here, how can I leave? Gopral had an expression that said, this way, it won't matter even if I casually release Sky Strike. Indeed, because there were too many Sky Wings, Wu Ming could not continuously supply mana to them. To put simply, he had cut off the mana supply link. However, if the Sky Wings ran out of mana, Wu Ming still had a way to supply them with mana. All he had to do was open the mana supply link. After all, Wu Ming was the master of the Sky Wings. Although the mana supply contract was not connected, the master-servant contract still existed. As long as there was a master-servant contract between the Sky Wings and Wu Ming, the Sky Wings would not disappear. As such, Wu Ming could take the initiative to open the mana supply link and provide the Sky Wings with mana. That's the case, but I can also choose not to provide you with mana. Gopral, Wu Ming smugly smiled. Why is it like this, master? Gopral's expression instantly turned sullen. She did not think that Wu Ming was joking. She had a feeling that if Gopral really used her mana recklessly and left due to a lack of mana, Wu Ming would definitely not provide her with mana. Right after that, Gopral's expression changed once more. But I'm really annoyed. Although these annoying grains of sand can be crushed like flesh, they can always regenerate. It's really annoying. Gopral tried to act cute. After all, Gopral was not Wu Ming. If even Wu Ming was a little dissatisfied, there was no need to mention Gopral. She did not have that kind of patience. Moreover, Jillian was currently a berserker. Berserk was constantly affecting her. However, even if Gopral was not affected by Berserk, she would still be so irritable. After all, she was the alien Gopral that gave the Skywings a headache. Then close your eyes and don't look. Just fly straight ahead, Wu Ming very irresponsibly said. Master is bullying me. I'm going to complain to Azrael. Wu Ming did not say anything else. He felt that it might be because he had been very kind, which led to Gopral's reckless behavior. Although Wu Ming did not find it annoying, there were times when Wu Ming felt a headache coming on because of Gopral. However, there was nothing he could do about it. Aside from Gopral, the other Skywings treated Wu Ming with respect, not showing any signs of dissatisfaction or enmity. Thus, Wu Ming did not need to appear very fierce. Gopral was the only one who treated Wu Ming very casually, and Wu Ming could not be bothered to get angry. Thus, in such situations, he would just ignore Gopral. Master up ahead. Wu Ming was a little distracted as he wondered if he should change his attitude. Gopral's voice brought Wu Ming back to his senses. Looking up ahead, Wu Ming saw that there were quite a few Egyptian buildings not far away, and the sandstorm around them had basically dissipated. In other words, have we arrived? Chapter 706. The sandstorm dissipated without a trace, and the sun shone directly on the vast desert. A large group of ancient Egyptian buildings stood in the desert illuminated by the sun. The sun seemed to be a foil, shining on these magnificent buildings like the residence of the sun god. What appeared in front of Wu Ming were ancient buildings, including pyramids, temples, and so on. Generally speaking, such large buildings should not be built together. Coupled with the fact that Wu Ming did not see any buildings on the way, it undoubtedly confirmed one point. The other party had moved the buildings that were originally scattered in the desert to form such a magnificent group of buildings. And the other party did not place them randomly. The placement of these buildings was full of architectural aesthetics. The pyramids were next to each other, and the temples seemed to be combined. They were no less magnificent than the pyramids. The walls of each building were carved with figures and beautiful patterns. The sphinxes around the buildings were like guards, standing on both sides of the buildings, giving people a feeling that they could really come to life. A large number of giant pillars stood in the open space, setting off the other buildings. It was quite spectacular. Wuming glanced around. The number of buildings here was at least dozens, and the various buildings were compatible with each other, giving people a sense of natural beauty. And these buildings looked as if they had always been here. It was impossible to tell that they had been moved here. These buildings were obviously in ancient Egyptian style, but they did not have an ancient aura. They were all brand new, as if they had been baptized by the sun. As expected of the famous Ramses II. In my opinion, history's praise for him has been degraded a lot, Wuming praised. Wuming had never seen Ramses II, but he knew a lot from history books and other records. Ramses II succeeded the throne. In order to consolidate Egypt, he sent troops abroad and carried out expeditions. And he fought intermittent wars with the empire that occupied Syria at that time, the Hittite Empire, for 16 years. At that time, the Hittites were not weak, because if they were weak, they would not have been able to occupy most of the land in Syria. The geographical location of Syria at that time was quite controversial. Ancient Syria was located at the junction of Asia, Africa, and Europe. It was the central link of sea and land trade. However, the superior geographical location attracted the attention of the surrounding powers, and the ancient Egyptian kingdom was even more interested in it. However, since the Hittites were able to occupy most of Syria, their strength was needless to say. Ramses II, who was able to fight a war with the Hittites, was not weak in terms of military strength. After concluding a peace treaty with the Hittites, Ramses II used his own talent and communication to bring ancient Egypt to its peak. As a pharaoh, king of gods, he loved the people, and the people loved him. After Ramses II died, people worshipped him as the incarnation of the sun god Ra. Although he claimed to be the incarnation of the sun god when he was alive. Although ancient Egypt immediately fell after his death, this did not hinder Ramses II's great achievements. In addition to these, Ramses II was also quite accomplished in the art of architecture. He had built many temples and rebuilt many of his predecessors' buildings, including temples, grottos, mausoleums, pyramids, sphinxes, and so on. He added bricks and tiles to those ancient buildings, making them more artistic. In the last 30 years of his life, Ramses II built a large number of shrines like crazy. Moreover, he arrogantly engraved his name on all the buildings of the previous generations that he had modified. What was even more serious was that he had randomly changed the monuments and portraits of people to his own, trying to claim the achievements of the previous generations of pharaohs as his own. Wuming estimated that it was for these reasons that Ramses II could have such a magnificent complex of buildings. In short, Ramses II could be said to be one of the greatest pharaohs in the history of ancient Egypt. Suddenly, a man's wild laughter resounded over the entire shrine. "Ah, good. Very good. Silver Knight. Praise me to your heart's content." The wild laughter continued, making people wonder how much air the man had in his lungs. "This laughter is probably Ramses II," Wuming said to Giliel, who was flying beside him. Perhaps only Ramses II would laugh out loud after hearing Wuming praise Ramses II. "Master, it seems that he's very arrogant." Giliel's eyes glowed red. "Calm down, Giliel." Wuming pressed his hand, which was enchanted with magic, on Giliel's head and rubbed it a few times. "I know." Giliel, who had originally wanted to kill him, instantly calmed down. She hid behind Wuming and tidied up her hair, which had become a chicken's nest. Even if she was a skywing, even if she was a weapon, Giliel was still a young girl. What a joke. Why would a skywing care about her appearance? The reason Giliel hid behind Wuming was that when Wuming rubbed Giliel's head, the magic power emitted from his hand hit Giliel's head. That hit was no less than if Wuming had hit Giliel's head. As for why he didn't just knock her on the head, since there were outsiders present, he had to give Jillian some face. As for why Giliel hid behind Wuming, it was because Giliel's body was slightly stronger. Wuming had increased the output of magic power. Thus, Giliel had already suffered a slight concussion. Only at this level could Jillian's crazy mind calm down. After making Giliel behave, Wuming looked at the shrine complex below. Sun King, why don't you come out and welcome the guests? Wuming's voice was very soft, but because of the magic power, it could still spread throughout the shrine complex. The other party did not reply, but a few seconds later, a figure walked out from the entrance of the central shrine. Wuming took a closer look and saw that it was a dark-skinned young girl. Her long hair reached the ground, and she wore gorgeous accessories on her head, body, and limbs. Her revealing Egyptian clothes could only cover her chest and lower body. She held a simple scepter with an eagle's head at the top. Please follow me. Lord Osmond is already waiting in the hall. Chapter 707. A black-skinned, noble-looking, long-haired girl holding a scepter. This was the information Wuming obtained from Gadotsi about Pharaoh Nitornis. And this new girl matched the characteristics of Nitornis's information very well. Wuming guessed that the girl who came out to welcome Wuming and Gopril should be the Nitornis mentioned in the information provided by Gadotsi. And according to Gadotsi, Nitornis seemed to be a subordinate of Ramses II. In other words, this invitation was not issued by Nitornis, but by Ramses II. Facing Ramses II's invitation that seemed like a feast at Hongmen, Wuming's heart was unperturbed, and he did not feel like laughing. Gopril, stay here, Wuming said to Gopril behind him. Why, master? Gopril, who was holding her head in discomfort due to her concussion, instantly felt better. She suddenly came to Wuming's side, spread her wings, and flapped them. I have an important mission for you. Remember, if I don't come out after half an hour, or if something strange happens after I enter the temple, use Sky Strike. Wuming tilted his head and looked at Gopril, who had flown to his left. Then, Gopril became excited. Can I use Sky Strike? Understood. Leave it to me, master. Remember the conditions. I'm not letting you use Sky Strike casually, Wuming emphasized helplessly. Yes, master, don't worry and go. Just leave the rest to me. Giliel seemed to understand and nodded with a smile. However, Wuming suspected that Gopril might not have listened, but it did not matter. Wuming did not expect Gopril to listen. He only needed her to stay outside obediently. Wuming was afraid that Gopril and Wuming would cause trouble after entering the shrine. The laughter from before was undoubtedly from Ramses II, and through that laughter, Wuming could determine that Ramses II was definitely a king comparable to Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh might seem to treat Wuming well, but as Gilgamesh's guardian, Wuming understood Gilgamesh very well. Gilgamesh was an out-and-out villain in modern society. But this was not the point. The point was that Gilgamesh's mouth was too stinky. Through Ramses II's laughter, Wuming realized that Ramses II was probably a character similar to Gilgamesh. Of course, the other party might not have as stinky a mouth as Gilgamesh, but his character was definitely peculiar. And with Gopril's irritable character and the berserk effect brought about by the berserker rank, Wuming judged that Ramses II was a guy who did not get along well with Gopril, since the other party was trying peaceful means before resorting to force. Wuming naturally wouldn't disrespect the other party. However, if Wuming were to bring Jillian in as well, Jillian would probably get so angry that she would start a fight right away. There was another point. If Wuming and Ramses II's negotiation fell apart, then Gopril could act as support and directly attack from the outside. All in all, it was best for Gopril to stay outside. Also, take it easy when releasing Sky Strike. Don't use up all your magic power in one go, Wuming reminded. Yes, master, I will pay attention. Looking at Gopril's rather sincere face, Wuming chose to give up. Then, Wuming flew toward the entrance of the great shrine below. Seeing that only Wuming had come over, Nitocris did not have any doubts. A king should talk to a king. What was the point of dragging a subordinate along? Even Nitocris herself was prepared to leave after bringing Wuming to Ramses II's room in the great shrine. Please follow me, Sir Knight. Nitocris bowed slightly and said respectfully to Wuming. Wuming nodded, and then the two entered the entrance together. The shadows engulfed the two. Gopral watched as Wuming entered the great shrine. She had originally been flying in the sky, but now she was lying down in the sky, not minding that she was wearing revealing clothes. Needless to say, the skywing species that was full of elves and now had wings full of magic power could indeed lie down in the sky like this. Then, what should I do to pass the time now? Gopral said, bored. She could naturally wait, but she had to find something to pass the time. Strictly speaking, Wuming did not restrict Gopral from finding something to do to pass the time. At this time, Gopral inadvertently saw some creatures that resembled sphinxes emerging from the sand in the desert below. The sphinxes gathered at the great shrine where Wuming had entered, looking around vigilantly like guards. Hee, Gopral laughed, the kind that was very happy. In the great shrine, in the corridor leading to the central stone room, Nitocris walked in front and Wuming followed behind. Nitocris led Wuming silently, and Wuming followed behind silently. The former was because there was no need to take the initiative to speak, while the latter was because he was admiring the murals on both sides of the corridor. Wuming was very interested in these murals, or rather, it was because Wuming had never seen any murals before. Although Wuming had experienced many worlds and spent a lot of time, Wuming had never seen any murals before. Although he was not curious, Wuming was quite interested in these precious products of human spiritual culture. Since there was a chance to come into contact with them, Wuming naturally would not let it go. Although Wuming did not know much about murals and did not understand the meaning expressed by the murals, he could still understand the contents of these murals. These murals depicted the deeds of Ramses II, including the succession of Ramses II, his love and marriage with Nefertari, the war against the Hittite Empire, the signing of contracts, the construction of buildings, the making of ancient Egypt to prosperity, and all the other deeds. It was like a historical poem of Ramses II. However, Wuming smiled and shook his head at the fact that Ramses II had recorded almost all his deeds on the murals. This guy is quite narcissistic, Wuming commented casually. Hearing Wuming's words, Nitocris, who was walking in front of Wuming, suddenly spoke. It's not narcissism. It's the honor that Lord Osmins deserves. What Nitocris said was reasonable, but Wuming did not care about this. He was more concerned about Nitocris, who had a fate with Gadotsi. You are the Pharaoh Nitocris of ancient Egypt, right? Chapter 708. Her footsteps paused, but she recovered in an instant and continued to lead Wuming forward. Yes, I am indeed Pharaoh Nitornis. May I know how you know who I am, my lord? Nitornis appeared to be slightly surprised. After all, she had never introduced herself before. I met Tachika, and she told me of your existence. Wuming noticed Niticle's pause, but he didn't say much. Instead, he directly told her how he knew Niticle's identity. The master of Chaldea, Niticle said lightly, but it seemed that she didn't mean what she said. Wuming could see that Niticles obviously knew Gadotsi, but for some reason, she seemed to have some concerns. It was probably because of her position. Ramses II did drive Gadotsi and the others out of the desert, but this didn't mean that Ramses II treated Gadotsi and the others as enemies. In Wuming's view, Ramses II's various actions showed that he didn't treat Gadotsi and the others who belonged to Chaldea as enemies at all. If Ramses II treated Gadotsi and the others as enemies, Gadotsi, Matthew, and Da Vinci probably wouldn't be able to leave the desert. Wuming didn't have the slightest doubt. He believed that Ramses II definitely had the ability to do so. Although Ramses II didn't seem to have much hostility toward Gadotsi and the others, that was only a hidden phenomenon. On the surface, Ramses II, who punished Gadotsi and the others and drove Gadotsi and the others out of the desert, was hostile toward Gadotsi and the others. That was what Niticles thought as well. From the conversation with Niticles, Wuming could see that Niticles respected Ramses II very much. Although it didn't reach the state of crazy reverence, Wooming still saw the look of a die-hard fan in Nidikal's eyes. Also, Nitakris didn't seem to have a very high IQ. After all, in the eyes of a slightly smarter person, Ramses II's actions were obvious. His various actions all showed that he let go Gadotsi and the others of Chaldea and the others. Gadotsi told Wooming that Ramses II punished them for disrespecting him, and Gadotsi and the others passed this trial called punishment but actually test. But this was different in Nidikal's eyes. The king was angry, Chaldea and the others weren't punished, so the king drove Chaldea and the others away. This was Nidikal's point of view. Therefore, to Nidikal's, who was a die-hard fan of Ramses II, Gadotsi was now an enemy. However, Nidikal's had a good impression of Gadotsi and the others, and she didn't want to treat Gadotsi and the others as enemies. However, the issue of standpoint forced Nidikal's to choose to stand against Gadotsi. Therefore, Nidikal's was a little worried. This level of concern couldn't be eliminated in an instant, and Wooming knew this very well. But it shouldn't be a problem to pass a message. Even if Ramses II heard it, he probably wouldn't use this as an excuse to punish Nidikal's. After all, he was a king, pharaoh. It was too degrading for him to be so narrow-minded. Tachika told me, if you see Miss Nidikal's, please thank her for me. Sigh. Wooming's words stunned Nidikal's, and she stopped at her tracks. Wooming wasn't lying. Before Gadotsi left, she told Wooming to thank Nidikal's when he saw her. Wooming didn't stop and continued. She said she was grateful that you brought them to find the supplies, and that you brought them to meet Ramses II. She was even more grateful that you sent them away. I don't have the right to be thanked by Miss Tachika. Standing in front of Wooming with her back facing Wooming, Nidikal's shook her head silently. I brought them here to get the supplies because Miss Tachika and the others saved me when I was kidnapped. I brought them to meet Lord Osmentis because Lord Osmentis requested it. I sent them away from the desert because they passed Lord Osmentis' test, and I only sent them for a short distance. From Nidikal's perspective, she brought Gadotsi and the others here just to return the favor. But her return of the favor put Gadotsi and the others in some danger. Fortunately, Gadotsi passed Ramses II's test, or else Nidikal's would be condemned in her heart. However, Wooming didn't know what Nidikal's was thinking, and he was slightly surprised. Nidikal's analysis was clear and logical, which made Wooming see Nidikal's in a new light. This guy's IQ isn't low. Nidikal's suddenly stopped, turned around, and stared straight into Wooming's eyes with narrowed eyes. I feel like you're thinking of something rude, Lord. Why would I? Wooming shook his head calmly. He had to be thick-skinned. All in all, I'm very grateful for your help to Tachika. Thank you. Wooming's words were full of sincerity, which made Nidikal's a little confused. It's nothing. Nidikal's shook her head again. Let's go. We're about to reach Lord Osmentis' throne, Nidikal's said as she started walking. Wooming followed. You seem to respect Ramses II a lot. Wooming asked casually. Of course, because Lord Osmentis is the king of kings, the pharaoh of pharaohs. He's the role model for pharaohs like me who haven't reached the kingdom of heaven. Nidikal's became excited when talking about Ramses II. The kingdom of eternity? Wooming crossed his arms as he pondered. It seemed that in ancient Egypt, pharaohs were the incarnations of gods, and there was a saying that went like this. After the pharaohs died, they would ascend to the kingdom of eternity and return to the god's side. For Nidikal's, who had become a heroic spirit, this meant that she had not returned to the kingdom of eternity. Although Ramses II had also become a heroic spirit, his ability seemed to be much stronger than Nidikal's. Perhaps it was because of this that Nidikal's had the feeling that Ramses II had entered the kingdom of heaven, and that she was inferior to Ramses II. Really, you're not weak either. Wooming, who was behind Nidikal's, smiled helplessly. Did you say something? Nidikal stopped and looked at Wooming. No, nothing. I was just talking to myself. Since there's nothing else, I should take my leave, Nidikal said. Nidikal pointed at the door in front of them, then spoke. We're here. Chapter 709. Wu Ming looked in the direction Natakri's was pointing at. It was the end of the corridor, and there was a simple earthen yellow stone door carved with decorative patterns. Without a doubt, behind the stone door was where Ramses II was. "I'll take my leave first, sir. Lord Osmanthus is waiting for you inside," Nidicles said and turned to leave. "Wait a minute, Pharaoh Nidicles." Wu Ming stopped her. "Is there anything else you need?" Nitoris looked at Wu Ming, who had stopped her with a puzzled expression. "Didn't Ramses II tell you my name? Why do you keep addressing me as sir?" After all, if it was Ramses II, he should be aware of Wu Ming's identity. And as someone sent by Ramses II to entertain Wu Ming, Nidicles should know Wu Ming's name. That would be too rude to Wu Ming, who is a guest. "No, Lord Osmanthus told me your name. The most mysterious legendary knight under King Arthur's command. Britain's silver dragon, Vilo, Serenthod." This time, it was Wu Ming who was stunned. Since Nidicles knew his identity, why didn't she address Wu Ming by that name, but instead used the vague title of Sir to address Wu Ming? Although this body is the body of a sinner who has yet to enter the kingdom of eternity, this body also has some abilities because of the name of Pharaoh, Nidicles explained. "Although Lord Osmanthus told me that your identity is a knight of the Round Table, this body can still see that your true identity is not so." Although Nidicles' identity as a pharaoh was half-pushed, she still obtained divinity, the son of the sky god Horus, and his incarnation. Immediately after, Nidicles suddenly became respectful. "Just like Lord Osmanthus is the incarnation of the sun god Ra. Although I can't see your true body clearly, I still see some clues. You are a great person." Immediately after, Nidicles revealed an embarrassed look. "Because I can see that your identity is not as simple as a knight of the Round Table, I can no longer address you as Vilo Serenthod. Similarly, because I can't see what your true identity is, I can only address you as a vague title like Sir." After Nidicles' explanation, Wu Ming felt relieved. Although Nidicles' identity as a pharaoh wasn't as legitimate as other pharaoh, she was still the incarnation of a god. It was normal for her to be able to see some clues about Wu Ming's identity. But in this case, didn't Ramses II, with a pharaoh was a Pharaoh Serenthod? Pharaoh Serenthod. But he didn't tell Pharaoh Serenthod, Saranthos, however. Ramses II didn't tell her about the origin dragon. Although she didn't know why, it wasn't important anymore. Because Wu Ming was about to meet Ramses II, it was better to ask all his questions face to face. As for Nidicles, it's a little perfunctory to call a refugee without a name. "Just call me Vilo. After all, I'm just a knight now," Wu Ming replied. Since Ramses II didn't tell his subordinates about Wu Ming's secret, then Wu Ming wouldn't take his place. "Yes, Sir Vilo. Since I've brought you here, I'll take my leave now," Nitornis said before she walked into the dimly lit corridor behind her. "Meeting is fate. Let me give you an evaluation." Upon hearing Wu Ming's words, Nitornis stopped in her tracks again. Not entering the kingdom of eternity doesn't mean that you're unqualified as a pharaoh. In my opinion, even a pharaoh who was raised to the position of a pharaoh like a puppet is able to choose death to avenge his family. Such a pharaoh isn't inferior to other pharaoh. Wu Ming's words shocked Nitornis. As for why, it was because no one had said such words to her before. "I inform you as a great person. You should be proud of it. Thank you for your praise, Sir Vilo. Master of Chaldea, with the help of someone like you, I don't have to worry about their safety." Nitornis didn't turn around and spoke with her back facing Wu Ming. Saying this, Natakri's left. This time, Wu Ming didn't stop Nitornis and let her leave on her own. "I see. Great stupidity appears to be wisdom." Wu Ming nodded. As expected, a pharaoh, even if she was a puppet, wasn't someone without intelligence. Nitornis might have guessed that Wu Ming came to obtain the Holy Grail for Gadotsi. Although Wu Ming prepared to obtain the Holy Grail in order to ruin Artoria's plan, Wu Ming's goal of obtaining the Holy Grail was ultimately for Gadotsi, or rather, Chaldea. But the reason wasn't important anymore, because Wu Ming was about to face the Sun King, Ramses II, who held the Holy Grail. Without any hesitation, Wu Ming walked up to the stone door and used a little force. The stone door seemed to have some kind of mechanism, and Wu Ming pushed it open with a little force. The first thing that entered Wu Ming's eyes was the dazzling sunlight. Wu Ming squinted his eyes subconsciously. After that, an unusually spacious hall appeared in front of Wu Ming. Unlike the gloomy corridor that Wu Ming passed by before, this hall seemed to be under the sun. The hall was very spacious, and from the outside, it was impossible to tell that there was such a spacious space inside the hall. The walls around the hall were also engraved with murals, and the surrounding walls extended diagonally with the centermost point as the center. It felt like a pyramid. However, in this spacious space, it didn't seem like a pyramid at all. Only people with eyesight like Wu Ming could see it. At the very least, ordinary people like Gadotsi wouldn't be able to see it. Several thick, load-bearing pillars were arranged in a regular pattern in the hall. Sunlight that appeared out of nowhere sprinkled on the walls and floor, dyeing them with a layer of golden color. In the centermost position, there was a high platform that looked like a small pyramid. Step-like steps were located in front of this high platform. This was undoubtedly the throne. And at the highest point of this throne sat a dark-skinned man in gorgeous ancient Egyptian clothing. This should be Sun King Ramses II. Chapter 710. The one sitting on the throne was indeed Ramses II. At this moment, Ramses II's eyes were closed as if he had fallen asleep from the long wait. After Wu Ming stared at the other party for a few seconds, Ramses II opened his eyes as if his heart was connected. Ramses II stared at Wu Ming's crimson eyes with his golden eyes and slowly opened his mouth. "You're finally here, Origin Dragon." Ramses II's words made Wu Ming certain that the other party indeed knew his identity. "Take a seat." After Ramses II finished speaking, a cloud of sand suddenly appeared on the throne to his side. The sand condensed and turned into a stone seat. Wu Ming's identity was qualified to sit on the same level as him, and Ramses II's personality wasn't as bad as Gilgamesh's, so he prepared a seat for Wu Ming. Wu Ming didn't argue and walked up the stairs to the throne. The reason why he didn't use a portal to go up directly was mainly to give the other party face. To be treated as an equal by such a king, even Wu Ming knew when to advance and when to retreat. Wu Ming walked up the throne unhurriedly and sat down on the seat that Ramses II had prepared for him. Then, Wu Ming's body surged with magic power and blue flames burned, covering Wu Ming's armor. Wu Ming waved his hand and the flames dissipated. Wu Ming, who was originally wearing armor, was now wearing a ceremonial robe that Wu Ming had worn in Camelot. The ceremonial robe was something that Wu Ming had casually condensed with magic power, so he changed into a ceremonial robe. After all, it was rude to wear armor during a meeting. "Nice to meet you, Sun King Ramses II. I'm glad to be able to have a peaceful conversation with you." Wu Ming took the initiative to greet him. "I'm also quite interested in your existence. Although you're still young, I can't see through your strength. As expected of the Great One." Ramses II maintained the posture of holding his head with one hand and commented on Wu Ming. "I'm quite surprised by you. In my opinion, an existence like you should have the same personality as Gilgamesh." Wu Ming meant that Ramses II's attitude toward him was a little too good. "As a pharaoh, the king of kings, I'm naturally arrogant, but my arrogance doesn't mean I'm extremely conceited. I'm different from the Golden King," Ramses II said, while still holding his head with one hand. It seemed that Ramses II still knew Gilgamesh. "Then, why don't you tell Pharaoh Nitornis about my true identity? As a pharaoh, the child of the sky god is still too immature, and I don't need to say more about this. She has already seen some clues." Although Ramses II's words were reasonable, Wu Ming felt that he was actually in a good mood and didn't tell Nitornis about Wu Ming's true identity. It was probably time to change the topic. "Let's cut to the chase. Dragon of Origin, you came to my territory pretending to be a Lion King knight. What business do you have?" Ramses II's eyes were arrogant and his voice was calm. There's no such thing as pretending. This body's spiritual base is King Arthur's knight. It's just that I tampered with it a little so that I can use the power of my true body. After all, Wuming thought that it would be a little difficult for him to deal with this singularity where the spiritual base of Vilo Sarenthod was severely damaged. Although it wasn't to the extent that he was lacking in strength, but if he really needed to fight, Wuming would have a hard time. After all, in many cases, violence was the best way to solve a problem, just like how Wuming persuaded Tristan to surrender with violence. Oh, that means you didn't come to me as a Lion King knight. Ramses II squinted his eyes and smiled. If that's the case, you should be here for the master of Chaldea. With just one sentence in the current situation, he was able to analyze the camp that Wuming belonged to. This made Wuming very impressed. As expected of one of the greatest pharaohs of ancient Egypt, his wisdom was also extraordinary. Indeed, for your action of letting Chaldea go, I would like to express my gratitude. There's no need for that. It's just that I'm slightly interested in the master of Chaldea. Ramses II rejected Wuming's gratitude. In response, Wuming smiled. If it's a kind interest, that's fine, but as Wuming spoke, magic surged around him. If it's a malicious interest, I won't sit back and watch your interest hurt Tachika, Sun King. Wuming's expression instantly became serious as he stared at Ramses II, as if he would attack at any moment. Dragon of origin, are you threatening me? Ramses II wasn't a mild-tempered person after all. In the face of Wuming's threatening words, he was naturally a little angry. I wouldn't dare. Tachika is like family to me. I think protecting family is something that everyone, even the king, wants to do no matter what. Although Wuming's words were reasonable, but Wuming's words reminded Ramses II of his beloved wife and the eldest son that she gave birth to but died of illness. I don't want to treat the Dragon of Origin as a glib talker. You're here for the Holy Grail, right? Ramses II changed the topic again. That's right. Wuming nodded without hesitation. Seeing that Ramses II was speechless and changed the topic after being targeted by his words, Wuming also changed the topic. The Holy Grail is needed to repair the singularity. As long as the Holy Grail doesn't exist in this singularity, the era will slowly be repaired. However, Ramses II scoffed at Wuming's words. You were King Arthur's knight. Although I don't know what the White King wants to do, I know one thing. After the Holy Grail is recovered, the singularity will never be properly repaired. Wuming frowned slightly. Ramses II didn't seem to be lying. Could it be that Artoria has some other plans? You should have seen the changes in this singularity. Even if the Holy Grail is recovered, before the singularity is completely repaired, if the Lion King wants to do something, the other party can do it. Ramses II's words made sense, because the singularity collapsed more severely. After the Holy Grail was recovered, the self-repair of this singularity wasn't as fast as other singularities. If Artoria had any plans at that time, then this singularity was indeed likely to have an accident. To be more serious, this singularity was likely to directly. There's no doubt that it will collapse. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.